Our story begins in the Soul River Cultivation world, a place of immense power and ancient mysteries. We see a young man named Gu Chang'e, who has been reborn as the direct heir of the immortal Gu clan. His father is the reigning heavenly emperor, and his grandfather is a true immortal of the red dust. Even the humble servants in his household possess the cultivation of saints, a bit overkill, perhaps. Born into such a formidable family, he could have easily spent his days in idle luxury without a single care. But fate had other plans, as he suddenly activated the worker system within his mind. The system commanded him to travel to the depths of an alien world to end a great dark outbreak. He looked at his status and background and thought, why on earth would he do that himself? So, he simply handed the coordinates over to his family, letting his father lead a massive army into battle. They easily crushed the alien continent, suppressed the Dark Sovereigns, and ended the chaos in record time. The moment the mission was complete, he couldn't help but smile and address the system directly. He told himself that only a fool would ignore such powerful resources. We now find him in the Supreme Hall. Taking a deep breath, he looked at his father and prepared to speak. Father, he began respectfully. I have news of a great joy to report. His father, Gu Lingtian, raised an eyebrow in curiosity. A great joy? Oh, then by all means, let us hear it, the emperor replied calmly. He stepped forward and lowered his voice, though he couldn't quite hide the excitement in his tone. Father, just now, while I was sitting in quiet meditation within the palace grounds, perhaps because of today's coming-of-age ceremony, my bloodline power seems to have advanced. He explained that as his soul surged, he felt a sudden, mysterious connection through the void. He had established a faint, distant link with a completely unknown world. To be honest, his explanation was a blend of truth and fiction, as the system truly resided within his soul. Claiming it was a soul-based connection wasn't entirely a lie, especially since he had sensed a completely foreign world. Gu Lingtian's expression shifted instantly, as one would expect from a 19th realm heavenly emperor who surpassed even the Supremes. He understood the weight of those words perfectly, beyond their own realm. The vast heavens and myriad worlds were boundless. In the endless chaotic void, countless worlds of all sizes floated, and each one of them represented something invaluable. They held endless resources, unique cultivation systems, and the pure, complete essence of heaven and earth itself. For an immortal family like the Gu clan, conquering a world to seize its resources and essence was a vital tradition. It was, quite frankly, the most important way to ensure the family's continued prosperity and overwhelming strength. The last time the Gu clan had launched a cross-realm conquest was tens of thousands of years ago, led by a master. The Supreme Ao Wei had exhausted his life's blood just to calculate the coordinates of a single, dying small world. Even so, that conquest had brought the Gu clan immense benefits, and now his son claimed to have found another. Gu Lingtian's breathing quickened for a brief moment, though as a reigning emperor, his mental fortitude was naturally immense. He regained his composure almost instantly, his mind already racing with the possibilities of this revelation. He asked about the laws of that world and its current state, prompting Chang'e to share what he had sensed. Chang'e explained that the world was incredibly rich in resources, with spiritual energy so thick it was almost tangible. While the great Tao laws there weren't as complete as their own, they possessed a unique and mysterious quality. He was dangling a massive bait before his father, and sure enough, the mention of extremely rich resources worked perfectly. Gu Lingtian's eyes brightened further, but then Chang'e shifted his tone, letting a sudden weight settle into his voice. He warned that the world appeared to be in the midst of a great catastrophe, a dark outbreak of sorts. It seemed that powerful entities were moving behind the scenes, driven by their own dark and mysterious purposes. He described how these entities were frantically slaughtering living beings across that distant world. This caused the entire world to be filled with soaring resentment, leaving its natural laws in complete chaos. The world itself showed signs of collapsing, and after hearing this, Gu Lingtian fell into a deep silence. He didn't speak immediately, but within his deep, piercing eyes, countless thoughts were flashing by at high speed. A world rich in resources, currently suffering from internal turmoil, was a rare prize indeed. When we combine those facts with a set of clear coordinates, the implications are staggering. He understood better than anyone that this represented a heaven-defying fortune and a monumental opportunity. If what his son said was true, the Gu clan was likely on the verge of something massive. They were looking at unprecedented growth, fueled by the benefits of seizing a complete world's essence. This could elevate the Gu clan's foundation to a new level, perhaps even allowing him to glimpse a legend. He dared to dream of the true immortal realm, and at that thought, even his disciplined heart raced uncontrollably. He stood up abruptly and crossed the room in a single step, appearing instantly right before Chang'e. He reached out, placing a hand on the boy's shoulder as a gentle, yet vast divine sense flooded Chang'e's body. He began carefully inspecting his son's soul, and though Chang'e felt a jolt of surprise, he remained outwardly calm. As for being nervous, well, he wasn't, considering he had been a transmigrator since he was in the womb. If he were going to be caught, it would have happened long ago, and he wasn't worried about the system either. If it was discovered, he would simply stop hiding and continue as a loyal disciple. It was that simple. Gu Lingtian's divine sense swept through the sea of the soul, finding it exceptionally powerful and pure. Deep within, he did indeed sense a faint, flickering aura from another world lingering there. That aura was full of death, resentment, and madness, matching the scene of turmoil Chang'e had described. He had always planned to lead the Gu family to further glory, yet he never imagined his son would bring him a surprise that far exceeded his wildest expectations. Gu Lingtian finally reached his limit and, unable to suppress his excitement any longer, let out a thunderous laugh that echoed toward the heavens. The entire Supreme Hall began to hum and vibrate as a terrifying aura of heaven and earth surged uncontrollably into the sky. It was a display of power so immense that it stirred the very clouds of the 9 heavens. He shouted the word good 3 times in a row, punctuating his joy by firmly clapping Chang'e on the shoulder. The boy's shoulder actually stung from the force of it, but he kept a bright, triumphant smile on his face as Gu Lingtian paced excitedly. The light in the father's eyes grew brighter with every step. A world currently in turmoil was a world with its defenses wide open. As for those so-called powerful entities mentioned earlier, well, they were of little concern to him. No matter how strong they were, they couldn't possibly compare to the deep heritage and vast resources of the Gu clan. This was quite literally a godsend, but he realized the matter was far too significant to handle alone. It had already moved beyond the scope of what a single patriarch could decide on his own. He looked at his son and told him he had done a magnificent job. He called out for his subordinates, and the family guards appeared instantly, awaiting their master's command. He ordered them to take his heaven and earth token to the family's forbidden grounds and awaken the ancestor. The moment those words left Gu Lingtian's mouth, the atmosphere in the room shifted instantly. The 2 14th-stage quasi-saint guards kneeling on the floor trembled violently, their faces masked in pure disbelief. They were struck by a sense of sheer shock, even wondering for a moment if they had heard him correctly. In the Gu clan, that title referred to only one person, the supreme being slumbering in the deepest part of the Forbidden Zone. We are talking about a legendary figure who had long ago stepped into the realm of a true immortal, the clan's ultimate pillar of strength. This was the primary reason the Gu clan could stand at the pinnacle of the immortal realm and look down upon eternity. Unless the family was facing an absolute crisis of life and death, it was strictly forbidden to even consider the possibility. To disturb the ancestor's slumber was a rare event. In fact, the last time he was awakened was 200,000 years ago. Back then, the Gu family had discovered a massive world in its terminal stage within the cosmic sea and exhausted every resource to conquer it. Just as they were about to reap the rewards, several immortal legacies united to attack, and even a great supreme bled out as they reached their limit. Only then did they resort to their final trump card. The ancestor emerged and, with just a single finger, changed everything. He wiped the entire allied army of those immortal legacies from existence, leaving the survivors in a state of absolute terror. It took the combined, heavy sacrifices of the immortal beings behind those legacies to finally convince the ancestor to stop the total annihilation. That single display of power continued to awe the entire primordial immortal realm for countless eras, and from that day forward, no one dared to challenge the prestige of the Gu family, a legacy that eventually brought forth 2 more supreme elders. Yet today, with no invasion and the family safe, the patriarch was suddenly calling for the ancestor to be awakened once more. The 2 guards were left wondering what monumental event could have occurred as their minds went completely blank with shock. For a moment, they even forgot to respond, causing Gu Lingtian to frown as a faint, heavy pressure began to radiate from him. The guards felt as if they had been struck by lightning, snapping out of their daze and quickly burying their heads deep toward the floor. Their voices trembled as they managed to stammer out that they would obey the patriarch's command immediately. They told themselves that if the patriarch had made this decision, there must be a profound reason for it, despite their shaking hands. One guard took the heaven and earth token, the symbol of supreme authority, from Gu Lingtian, and the 2 didn't dare delay for a second. In a flash of light, they transformed into 2 streaks of radiance, rushing out of the supreme hall at their maximum speed. As we watched them fly toward the family's forbidden grounds, we returned to Chang'e, who was watching their departing figures. Deep down, even he felt a surge of nervous excitement, realizing that things were escalating much faster than he expected. He couldn't help but think his father was playing a very high-stakes game, far exceeding what he had envisioned for his powerful parent. Chang'e had expected his father to be excited and take the news seriously, perhaps even calling a high-level family council. He imagined they would discuss the logistics of an expedition, but he never expected his father's reaction to be this direct and powerful. Without a second thought, Gu Lingtian had gone straight for the heavy hitters, the most formidable figure in the entire family, a true immortal. To be honest, the very concept was staggering. We are talking about a living legend, an immortal walking the mortal realm whose single drop of blood could suppress eras. A being of such caliber that a single strand of their hair could sever the sun, the moon, and the stars themselves. And yet, simply because of a few words Chang'e had spoken, this ancient existence was being roused from a deep slumber. It was thrilling, utterly, incredibly thrilling. While he maintained a calm exterior, deep down, his heart was racing. An indescribable surge of excitement erupted within him like a volcano, making him realize what it truly felt like to have the world at his feet. He wondered if this was the true experience of a top-tier immortal scion, especially since he only wanted to avoid being a servant to the system. He had merely used a bit of cleverness to get the family's help, so he wouldn't have to risk his own life on dangerous missions. In the end, his father had decided to roll out the equivalent of a strategic nuclear weapon, and the feeling was, well, it was quite something. It was satisfying, perhaps a bit too satisfying. Gu Lingtian, however, didn't notice the whirlwind of thoughts inside his son's head. The patriarch himself was currently in a state of extreme high-energy focus, having finalized the monumental decision to awaken the ancestor. For him, making such a call required immense courage and vision, but he saw the situation with perfect clarity. This was simply too big to ignore. A brand new world, overflowing with resources and with its coordinates clearly marked, was a prize beyond measure. To the Gu family, this discovery was nothing less than a chance for a total rebirth and a new era of dominance. However, he knew this wasn't something he could fully control alone, even with his status as the patriarch of the family. When it comes to cross-realm expeditions, one never truly knows how deep the waters are or what dangers lie beneath the surface. He wondered if the powerhouses of that other world were merely 18th realm supremes or something much more formidable. Whether they faced 19th realm beings or even immortals, he knew they had to be prepared for every possible threat. He reasoned that if he were wrong, the worst that could happen was a scolding from the ancestor, and perhaps giving his son a good thrashing later for the trouble. Yes, that was the plan. He turned his gaze toward Chang'e, looking at him with a newfound sense of clarity. His eyes grew increasingly soft, filled with a father's pride as he beckoned, calling Chang'e to come closer. Gu Lingtian walked to the high throne of the great hall, sat down, and gestured for his son to take a seat nearby. Chang'e obeyed. He moved toward the only other seat located just below the patriarch's own throne. It was a seat that represented being above 10,000 others, a position usually reserved for the most core supreme elders of the family. Without any hesitation, he sat down quite naturally. After all, he had always been the most favored direct descendant and the future heir. And now, although he hadn't heard a formal confirmation yet, the atmosphere in the room had shifted entirely. A heavenly emperor like Gu Lingtian rarely misjudged things, and he was 90% certain this was indeed a brand new world. This made Chang'e a symbol of good fortune who had performed an unparalleled service, the key figure in opening a new era for the Gu family. The father looked at his son and admitted that he had always believed Chang'e's greatest talent was his cultivation. But now, we see that even a heavenly emperor can admit when he was wrong. He realized that his son's greatest talent wasn't just strength, but his incredible luck and destiny. To him, Chang'e was nothing less than a divine blessing bestowed upon the Gu family by the heavens themselves. He thought to himself that every father should wish for a son like Chang'e, and this man, who suppressed Eris, was not holding back his praise. While Chang'e felt quite smug inside, he kept his outward expression humble, claiming his father was simply overpraising him. He insisted it was merely a stroke of good luck, and that everything was actually the result of the Gu family's flourishing destiny. He credited the protection of their ancestors for the discovery, a statement that, naturally, made Gu Lingtian even more satisfied. To the patriarch, his son was a genius with immense luck who remained calm and modest despite his achievements. Seeing his son credit the family instead of himself, he decided Chang'e was, quite simply, the perfect successor. Gu Lingtian waved his hand dismissively, telling his son there was no need for such modesty, as he had truly earned this praise. His expression suddenly turned serious as he warned that until the ancestor made a final decision, this matter must remain a secret. He emphasized that the fact that Chang'e had sensed the coordinates of an alternate world must not be leaked to a third party. For the time being, it was vital that no one else knew of this discovery, not even within their own inner circles. Chang'e nodded, understanding that even an innocent man can get into trouble for possessing a treasure, and while he doubted anyone in the family would dare move against him, he agreed that caution was never a mistake. And so, father and son began to speak in low, hushed tones within the great hall. Gu Lingtian began to ask for every possible detail regarding this mysterious other world they had stumbled upon. Chang'e, meanwhile, shared the information provided by his system, mixing truth with fiction and polishing the details in his own words. But just as the two of them were planning how to divide the resources of this new world, the entire Gu family ancestral land suddenly shook violently. An indescribable, vast, and terrifying aura erupted from the direction of the Forbidden Land, soaring straight into the heavens. That aura seemed to transcend eternal time and space, carrying a sense of both decay and immortality that instantly blanketed the entire immortal realm. High in the sky, the very laws of nature wailed and retreated, while countless stars seemed to lose their brilliance in an instant. The world trembled. At that moment, every ancient powerhouse in the immortal realm who had been in secluded meditation was jolted awake. No matter where they were or how high their cultivation, they all turned their gazes toward the territory of the Gu family in sheer shock. Their faces were filled with terror and disbelief at the sheer magnitude of the power they were sensing. Inside the great hall, Gu Lingtian stood up abruptly, his eyes flashing with an unprecedented and brilliant light. He knew immediately that this was the sign of the ancestor awakening, and he turned to Chang'e with excitement he could no longer suppress. We must remember that the Gu family's divine island is massive, like a continent floating in the universe, far beyond just the Great Hall. Beyond the core areas where the direct descendants live, there are countless cultivation grounds and sacred sites scattered across the land. From the Elders' Hall to the Scripture Pavilion and the alchemy workshops, every single member of the Gu family felt the shift. Whether they were deep in secluded meditation or busy handling family affairs, every single person stopped exactly what they were doing. At that moment, on a mountain peak shrouded in mist, a white-haired elder sat cross-legged upon a large green stone. He was the elder of transmission, responsible for teaching cultivation methods to the core disciples of the family. He was a powerful expert of the 18th realm, yet the very instant that terrifying aura reached him, everything changed. The smile on the elder's face froze instantly, and the teacup in his hand fell with a sharp crack, shattering into 1,000 pieces. He stood up abruptly, his entire body trembling as he looked toward the forbidden land with eyes full of awe and fanaticism. This, could it be? He stammered, barely able to find his voice. It was the ancestor awakening. Beside him, several young juniors whose cultivation was still shallow found themselves overwhelmed. Under the weight of that immense pressure, they collapsed onto the ground, their faces pale as they struggled even to breathe. One of them managed to gasp out, "Elder, what is happening?" "This is the majesty of our ancestor. All of you, simply kneel and kowtow in respect," the elder commanded. He warned them not to speak another word. Then, he straightened his robes and turned toward the direction of the forbidden land. He knelt down with profound solemnity, performing the grandest of bows as he cried out, "A descendant of the Gu family respectfully welcomes the ancestor back to the world." This same scene was playing out across every corner of the Gu family estate. Inside a magnificent council hall, over a dozen figures with terrifying auras sat in silence. These were the elders of the Gu family, and every one of them was a powerhouse of the 18th realm, men who could make the entire immortal realm tremble with a single step. But now, they were all testing the air in collective shock, whispering, "It is the ancestor." One of them exclaimed in disbelief, "The patriarch has actually awakened the ancestor." Heavens! They wondered what kind of monumental event could possibly require disturbing the great ancestor from his eternal slumber. A red-haired supreme with a fiery temper suddenly slammed his hand on the table and stood up. His face was a mask of shock and confusion. After all, the Gu family currently dominated the entire immortal realm. He couldn't imagine what could possibly require the awakening of the ancestor. He wondered if a true immortal from another realm was attacking, while a gray-robed elder sat nearby watching him. The elder opened his clouded eyes and gave him a cold, sharp look, calling out the name Xin Yan. He reminded the group that the patriarch has his own deep reasons for his actions, and as elders, they only needed to wait for the patriarch's orders. Under that gaze, the red-haired supreme immediately flinched. He sat back down, looking quite sheepish. This gray-robed man was the great elder, a man of immense seniority. His strength was at the peak of the 18th realm, just a step from the 19th. Yet even he, at this very moment, felt his heart surging like a stormy sea because he knew exactly what this awakening meant. He turned his deep gaze toward the outside of the hall, wondering what young Lingtian was actually planning. As for the various reactions from the outside world, we find that the one at the center of the storm was currently completely unaware of the chaos. Young Gu Chang'e followed closely behind his father, Gu Lingtian, turning into a streak of divine light as they flew rapidly toward the forbidden land. Along the way, he could clearly feel that the entire Gu family ancestral land was enveloped by an invisible, divine pressure. The laws of the great Tao, which usually flowed freely, seemed frozen and incredibly heavy, filled with an ancient aura. It was the kind of power that commanded reverence from the depths of one's soul. This, it seemed, was the majesty of a true immortal. Just the breath of his awakening was enough to make the myriad laws retreat, leaving the young man utterly shaken. He finally had a direct understanding of his ancestor's true power, and deep down, he felt a growing sense of certainty. With such a powerful figure backing him, he realized that the so-called supremes of the dark desolation world were nothing. They were nothing, really. He suspected the ancestor could wipe them out with a single breath. Before long, the two of them reached the outskirts of the Gu family's forbidden land, a place shrouded in chaotic mist. Deep within the ancient mountain range, the faint silhouette of a massive, primordial, immortal mausoleum began to emerge. Around the mausoleum, time and space were distorted and the great Tao collapsed, creating an absolute zone of death. Even supreme experts wouldn't dare approach lightly, yet we see the two quasi-saint guards who had been sent ahead. They were kneeling outside the forbidden zone, their bodies trembling uncontrollably as the heaven and earth decree hovered before them. The decree emitted a soft glow, barely managing to withstand the terrifying immortal pressure drifting from the depths of the land. Upon seeing Gu Lingtian and the young master arrive, the two looked as if they'd been granted a divine reprieve. Gu Lingtian gestured for them to rise, his gaze heavy as he looked toward that ancient, immortal mausoleum. The structure was now emitting a faint radiance, and the dust and stones covering the great gates were rapidly falling away. A series of muffled, thunderous rumbles began to echo from deep within the mausoleum's interior. It felt as if a beast sleeping for an eternity was slowly waking up, prompting Gu Lingtian to take a deep breath. He straightened his robes and then, facing the direction of the mausoleum, bowed deeply in a gesture of profound respect. His voice, carried by divine sense, entered the depths of the forbidden land as the young man followed his lead. He bowed respectfully as well. After all, even if this true immortal was his biological grandfather, they had only met once. Deep down, he felt a bit apprehensive, but just as his mind began to wander, an old, raspy voice spoke. It drifted out from the depths of the mausoleum, not loud, yet echoing clearly in the very depths of their souls. In the moment that ancient, raspy voice finally broke the silence, Gu Lingtian's body visibly trembled as he prepared his report for the ancestor. He explained that while the family didn't face total extinction, he had still chosen to disturb the immortal's rest. In the moment that ancient, raspy voice finally broke the silence, Gu Lingtian's body visibly trembled. He began his report, explaining that while the family didn't face total extinction, the Gu family had encountered something else. They had been presented with a monumental opportunity, an event so significant that it concerned everything. It involved the very destiny of the Gu family for 10,000 generations, and Lingtian didn't dare decide alone. Thus, he emboldened himself to ask the ancestor to leave seclusion and decide personally, his voice bolstered by divine sense. The words carried clearly into the depths of the mausoleum, followed by a long silence as the ancestor processed the news. It seemed the newly awakened elder was digesting the weight of Lingtian's claim about this so-called monumental opportunity. The ancient voice spoke again, this time carrying a faint, barely perceptible trace of genuine curiosity. The ancestor noted that if Lingtian used such grand words, it certainly couldn't be a trivial matter. Very well, the voice decreed, telling them to enter as the sound echoed through the clearing. Suddenly, the chaotic mist shrouding the forbidden land and the distorted laws of time and space began to shift. It was as if an invisible hand wiped them away, opening a safe passage just wide enough for a few people. The path led straight to the gates of the mausoleum, leaving Gu Lingtian absolutely overjoyed as he thanked the ancestor. He straightened up and gave a quick look to young Yuaner, telling him to follow closely. The young man followed behind his father, stepping cautiously onto the path, and immediately felt the world change. We see that the natural laws of the outside world ceased to exist here, replaced by something far more ancient. In its place was a pure, supreme, immortal aura. With just a single breath, the boy felt his very soul stir. He felt as if his immortal body was cheering in celebration. The path was short, and soon the two reached the entrance. They stood before the massive gates of the mausoleum, towering 10,000 feet high and forged from unknown immortal materials. The surface was mottled with the marks of countless ages, and now, the great doors were slowly swinging inward. The massive gates slowly swing inward, opening a narrow crack from which a brilliant, yet gentle, immortal light begins to shine. With a thunderous boom, the doors fly wide open, revealing a scene that is anything but the dark, gloomy tomb one might expect. Instead, we see a vast, boundless starry sky where countless stars are born and extinguished in a cycle of eternal motion. Divine chains, formed from the very laws of the great Tao, weave through the cosmos like soaring dragons. They form a complete and stable internal universe, isolated from the outside world, and right at the very center of this celestial expanse. Suspended in the heart of the starlight, floats an ancient and simple bronze coffin. The coffin is covered in dense immortal runes, each one appearing to contain the fundamental truths of heaven and earth. To be honest, just a single glance at them is enough to make one's soul feel as if it might shatter. The lid is already halfway open. A terrifying aura, powerful enough to freeze the river of time, emanates from within as Gu Lingtian leads young Yuaner forward. They walk until they reach the ceremonial area directly in front of the bronze coffin, where they finally come to a halt. Once again, Lingtian bows deeply in a show of profound respect, announcing his presence to the ancestor. Beside him, young Gu Yuan follows suit, offering his own respectful greetings to the ancient figure. The boy tries to peer inside to see what lies within, but the interior is filled with swirling chaotic mist and shimmering light. It is impossible to see clearly, though we can just make out a thin, withered figure slowly sitting up from within the depths of the coffin. The ancient voice speaks again, telling them to rise since there are no outsiders present to witness this moment. This time the voice is much clearer. Lingtian chuckles, noting that there were indeed outsiders present just a moment ago. His expression is no longer as stern as it was outside, and finally, the figure within the coffin becomes visible to us. He is an old man dressed in simple gray robes, his frame thin and his sparse hair a dull, faded white. His face is a map of deep wrinkles, and his gaze is cloudy, yet calm as he first looks at Lingtian before turning to the boy. His eyes settle on Yuan'er, and he lets out a soft sound of surprise, noting that the boy's soul is far stronger than when they first met. The ancestor notes that the boy's soul has become much more refined, suggesting that Lingtian has put in a great deal of effort over the years. He senses an interesting aura on the boy that even he cannot see through, which makes Yuan'er's heart skip a beat. An interesting aura, indeed. Deep down, the boy wonders if this is a trace left by his system, or perhaps the lingering scent of that dark, chaotic world. Before he can figure it out, Gu Lingtian steps forward and addresses his father, explaining that this is exactly why they have come. He begins to recount everything Yuan'er told him, starting from the moment the boy's bloodline awakened and his soul underwent its transformation. He describes how the boy sensed the coordinates of another world, a place rich in resources, yet currently consumed by a great upheaval. As Lingtian tells the story, a flicker of genuine interest finally appears on the ancestor's otherwise calm and expressionless face. His cloudy eyes turn back toward the boy, but this time, the look in them has changed completely. He asks for confirmation. He asks if Yuan'er can truly locate the coordinates of that world, and Lingtian confirms that he has personally investigated the matter. He explains that deep within Yuan'er's soul, there is indeed a trace of an otherworldly aura that matches his story perfectly. The ancestor falls silent, his gaze, which seems capable of piercing through eternity, scanning back and forth between Lingtian and the boy. After a long silence, one that feels like an entire century has passed, the ancestor slowly raises his withered hand. With a gentle tap on the air, a vast and boundless star map suddenly unfurls before the three of them with a soft hum. It is a three-dimensional map of the entire immortal realm and the endless chaotic regions surrounding it, marked with countless points of light. Each point represents a world or a galaxy. The ancestor looks at the boy and asks him to point out where this world is located. In a raspy voice, he asks the boy to show him the way. Yuan'er nods, ready to reveal the truth. Relying on the system's navigation, the boy's vision blurs for a moment until a faint, almost extinguished dark red light appears in the star map. The point is clearly marked, located in a desolate area of chaos far away from the main routes of the immortal realm. Without the system's help, even a true immortal searching for 10,000 years might never have discovered its existence. Having found what he was looking for, the boy feels a sense of relief and reaches out his hand without a moment's hesitation. Pointing toward that dark red speck of light, the boy tells his grandfather and father to look, for that world is right there. Following the direction of his finger, the eyes of both Gu Lingtian and the ancestor within the Bronze Pass converge on the spot. In a corner of that vast star map, they see an extremely remote region wrapped in endless chaotic currents, desolate and deathly silent. It is utterly inconspicuous on the map. Had he not pointed it out precisely, even a true immortal's divine sense might have dismissed it. It would have been ignored as a worthless ruin of chaos, yet deep within those ruins, a single dark red point of light remains. It flickers weakly, like a candle in the wind that could be extinguished at any moment. That, he confirms, is the place. Gu Lingtian holds his breath, his heart racing so fast it feels as though it might jump right out of his throat. Though he is a powerful figure who can look down upon the ages, before his true immortal father, he still feels like a child awaiting a grade. He is nearly certain of the truth, yet he still requires the final confirmation from the withered elder known as the ancestor. The old man remains silent, but his eyes, which were once cloudy, have suddenly become terrifyingly bright. It is as if two suns are burning within them, his gaze seemingly piercing through time and space to cross the endless chaos. His presence descends directly upon that dark red point of light, and suddenly, an invisible yet supreme will of the immortal Tao erupts. Using the coordinates on the star map as a shadow, it instantly crosses 10,000 light-years. Within the boy's mind, the system interface shudders. A series of urgent alarms begin to blare, flashing warnings across his vision that something is very wrong. The system's underlying logic is being analyzed, causing his heart to sink. To be honest, he hadn't expected this level of power. He wonders if the ancestor is truly this formidable, to simply look at a map and reach out to the Xiantian continent from his own home. The system had always seemed so arrogant and invincible in his head, yet one move from the ancestor has left it completely dazed. It seems there is no room for resistance. Time itself feels as though it has frozen, while Gu Lingtian watches his father with intense nerves. He hardly dares to breathe, while the boy prays fervently in his heart. We don't know how much time passes, perhaps a second, or perhaps 10 million years, before the ancestor's piercing gaze finally withdraws from the star map. He slowly closes his eyes, his parched lips twitching slightly, as if he is savoring a lingering memory. He chuckles softly. A light laugh drifts out from the bronze coffin, a sound so faint, yet it allows both Gu Lingtian and the boy to breathe again. A A smile, we realize, means there is hope. Interesting, the ancestor whispers. Truly interesting. The ancestor opens his eyes once more and fixes his gaze upon the boy, though this time, it isn't just simple admiration. Instead, there is a deep sense of wonder and a touch of lament. Resentment fills the air, and the very laws of nature seem to wail. He confirms the boy's story, noting that the world's origin is weeping. It is indeed a great realm teetering on the brink of destruction. Hearing this, Gu Lingtian's fists tighten instantly, his body trembling with an excitement he can barely contain. It worked. It is all true. However, the ancestor's tone suddenly shifts, causing Gu Lingtian's heart to leap into his throat once again. Within that endless silence and ruin, the old man continues, I caught the scent of a fragrance, one that is incomparably sweet. A look of pure intoxication crosses the ancestor's face. It is the scent of a world's origin reaching the absolute peak of maturity. It is the final aroma released just before rot sets in, much like a divine fruit that is most perfect the moment before it spoils. He remarks that while the methods of the one causing the chaos are crude, the path they have chosen is actually correct. That person is using the blood and souls of billions to force the world to ripen, hoping to devour the fruit before the collapse. If a world origin of this magnitude could be swallowed whole, the rewards would be beyond imagination. The ancestor scoffs, telling Lingtian that this might be the very thing that brings him one step closer to his father's own realm. These words strike Gu Lingtian's mind like a bolt of lightning. One step closer, the thought consumes him. He is currently in the heaven-earth realm, so the next step would be his father's level, the state of a true immortal of the mortal realm. The bottleneck that has frustrated him for countless millennia finally shows a glimmer of hope. Father, Gu Lingtian stammers. His voice trembles with an intensity that is hard to describe, but the ancestor simply waves a hand, telling him not to celebrate too early. His gaze turns back to the boy. He is far more curious about how Young Yu managed to see across the endless chaos. We see the moment the ancestor finally asks the crucial question, and Young Yu feels a sudden tightening in his chest as he prepares his rehearsed response. With a calm and respectful tone, he answers that he isn't entirely sure, but it felt as though his longevity immortal body was changing. He explains that an indescribable shift occurred, and a voice seemed to guide him, crying out for help from across the void. The boy claims the world itself was begging for him to save it, and surprisingly, the ancestor doesn't doubt this for a single second. Instead, the old man bursts into a booming laugh, shouting that it makes perfect sense. It wasn't the boy sensing the world, he realizes. It was the world calling out to the boy. As the ancestor's laughter echoes through the inner universe, we see that he finally understands everything. The stars themselves tremble at the sound, and the gaze he fixes on you is now filled with an unprecedented level of satisfaction. He turns to Lingtian, recalling how he had called you the Qilin of the Gu family, a child of destiny born at the perfect moment. The ancestor explains that the dying world sought him out because his longevity immortal body resonated with that world's great Tao. His luck and destiny are apparently vast enough to carry the weight of a world's final hope, which, to be honest, is quite a burden for a child. Growing more excited by the moment, the ancestor's withered body actually leans forward, partially emerging from the bronze coffin. He proclaims it is wonderful, noting that after a million years of silence, the Gu family has finally produced a descendant with such immense fortune. Yu stands there, slightly dazed by the reaction, while Lingtian asks for clarification on what his father truly intends to do next. The ancestor's eyes sweep over the dark red dot on the star map with an air of absolute, unquestionable dominance. A world has delivered itself to them. He sees a ripening fruit of the great Tao and a family prodigy born to claim it, a combination that feels like a gift from the heavens. He declares that to refuse such a gift would be a sin against fate itself. And then, his voice suddenly turns cold and lethal. He issues a command that cuts through the air. Summon every elder currently in the clan to the Supreme Hall within 15 minutes. He tells Lingtian to inform them all of one simple fact. The Gu family is going to war. Yes, a full-scale invasion is beginning. The moment those words leave his lips, the very stars of the inner universe seem to freeze in place as an indescribable aura of slaughter erupts. This terrifying power explodes from his frail body, causing Gu Lingtian to shudder as the heaven-earth bloodline within him begins to boil. Everything is boiling over. He has waited for this day for far too long, ever since he first took over the position of family head. Although the Gu family remains the overlord of the immortal realm, they have been like a sleeping giant that hasn't shown its teeth to the world in ages. It is time to reveal their power to the heavens once more. Lingtian bows deeply toward the bronze coffin, accepting the command with absolute devotion. His eyes are filled with an unprecedented level of fanaticism and excitement. Meanwhile, the ancestor's gaze turns back toward Young Yu. The old man's expression softens considerably as he tells the boy that he has performed an incomparable service for the family this time. He promises that once this is over, he will personally forge Yu's foundation, a promise that makes the boy's heart skip a violent beat. We are talking about a true immortal of the mortal realm personally building a foundation for a mortal who hasn't even begun to cultivate yet. This is a treatment so heaven-defying that, if word got out, the entire immortal realm would likely descend into a state of absolute madness. Even the direct descendants of other longevity clans could never dream of such an honor. Yu quickly offers his thanks to his grandfather. Suppressing the wild excitement in his heart, he performs a respectful salute. The ancestor simply waves a hand, telling them it is time to go. He instructs Ling Tian to take you to the Supreme Hall first, promising to arrive shortly after. Ling Tian obeys his father immediately. He takes Yu's hand and turns to leave with visible emotion. Deep down, Yu knows he has played his cards perfectly this time. Handing the system over to the family was a brilliant move. It didn't just save him from a near-death mission, it changed his entire fate. He has traded a life of struggle for a massive fortune, a move we might call reverse engineering the system for his own benefit. As the father and son walk out of the immortal forest, the terrifying pressure that had blanketed the Gu family lands begins to slowly recede. However, the clansmen remain immersed in the shock of what just happened. Not a single person dares to move or speak freely. When they see the family head, Ling Tian, and the young lord, Yu, walking out of the forbidden grounds completely unharmed, every single eye in the area fixes on them. They notice something particularly strange on Ling Tian's face as he approaches. He is unable to suppress his joy and excitement, holding Yu's hand with a level of intimacy that leaves everyone in a state of confusion. A massive question mark forms in their minds. They wonder, did the family head really wake the ancestor just for the sake of the young lord? They wonder if something went wrong with the young lord, but looking at the family head's face, this clearly seems like a moment of immense joy. Yet, what kind of joy could possibly require disturbing the great ancestor? Just as the crowd is lost in their uncertainty, Ling Tian's voice, filled with supreme authority and a hint of uncontrollable excitement, echoes across the entire Gu family divine island. He issues the family head's command. Every elder currently in the clan must gather at the Supreme Hall within 15 minutes. No one is permitted to be absent, and those who defy the order will be dealt with according to clan law. Once the order is given, it immediately sends a massive shockwave through the entire Gu family. To summon every single elder is, without question, the highest level of meeting the clan can hold. The last time a meeting of this magnitude was called was 20,000 years ago, back when they decided whether to launch a total assault on the Doomsday World. A startling realization begins to take root in the hearts of every Gu clansman who heard the command. They wonder if the Gu family is preparing for another foreign conquest. In an instant, the entire divine island is in an absolute fever. Countless powerful experts emerge from their secluded cultivation caves, rushing out like streaks of divine light. Even those busy with daily clan affairs drop everything to gaze toward the Supreme Hall. His face was a mask of pure excitement and anticipation as he waited for the order to begin the conquest. For any member of the Gu family, those words represent supreme glory and a massive opportunity for vast cultivation resources. It means a chance to build a legacy and signifies that the entire family's strength is about to take another massive leap forward. People ask if war is truly coming, and the answer seems to be yes. Otherwise, the family head wouldn't use such a tone. The fact that he called every elder is a sign. For some, who have been stuck at their current level for 500 years, this is the perfect chance to find the resources needed to break through. They wonder which foolish power is the target this time. Perhaps they have discovered a new world entirely. Discussions and cheers erupt in every corner of the Gu family island. The entire family is like a precision war machine that, after being silent for countless ages, is finally beginning to grind back into motion. And at the very center of this growing storm, young Yu follows closely behind his father, Ling Tian. They fly toward the Supreme Hall at a steady, unhurried pace, and along the way, every member of the Gu family they encounter stops in their tracks, regardless of whether they are high-ranking elders or powerful guardians, to face the two of them. They bow with profound respect, especially toward young Gyuan, offering greetings to the family head and the young lord as they pass. Their eyes are filled with awe, curiosity, and a hint of fanatical excitement, even though they don't yet know the specifics of what has occurred. But none of them are fools. The family head just emerged from the forbidden grounds with the young lord and immediately announced this massive decision. It doesn't take a genius to realize that this matter is inextricably linked to the young lord, Gyuan. To be honest, it's quite obvious. Otherwise, there would be absolutely no reason for Ling Tian to bring the boy along. The family head could have simply gone alone. As they greet him, Gyuan feels a surge of overwhelming satisfaction. This, he realizes, is the true taste of absolute power and status. It seems he has finally found the correct way to live as a top-tier immortal heir. Amidst these wandering thoughts, they arrive at the Supreme Hall. At the entrance, over a dozen figures with auras as deep as the ocean are already waiting, the very same members of the Elder Council. Leading them is the highly respected Great Elder, Gu Lingjiang, standing at the front of the assembly. When they see Ling Tian and Gyuan approaching, these 8 powerful experts of the 18th realm actually bow in unison toward the boy. Clearly, these pillars of the Gu family have already received word from the true immortal grandfather regarding the boy's unprecedented contribution. They understand that Gyuin has performed a service beyond measure, and so they call out together, "We welcome the young lord." On any ordinary day, any one of these figures could make the entire immortal realm tremble with a single stomp of their feet. Yet here they are, collectively performing such a grand salute to an 18-year-old boy who hasn't even begun his formal cultivation yet. If word of this scene were to spread, it would be enough to shock the entire world. Ling Tian watches this with a smile of immense pride. He makes no move to stop them, for he knows deep down that his son is more than worthy of such a gesture. Gu Yuan feels a stir in his heart, but he doesn't let it go to his head. He knows they are bowing to the opportunity he brought the family. He takes a step forward, returning the gesture with a slight, humble bow of his own, and speaks to the elders with a modest tone. Gu Yuan tells the elders there is no need for such ceremony, claiming he is unworthy of such honor because the family's glory depends on everyone's hard work. He modestly suggests he was simply in the right place at the right time. To be honest, his words are perfectly calculated and leave no room for criticism. By showing such humility and attributing the credit to the entire family, he ensures that every elder present feels respected and valued. The fiery-tempered, red-haired Supreme Elder, Gu Shuadao, laughs and tells Gu Yuan he is being far too modest. It's a rare sight for him. Any lingering confusion on Shuadao's face has vanished, replaced by pure excitement as he notes that luck is simply another form of strength. He claims that having a young lord with such auspicious fortune ensures the family's eternal prosperity, and another elder quickly voices his agreement. They declare that the young lord's actions will benefit the family for 1,000 generations, making their respectful salute entirely well-deserved. Gu Lingjiang, with eyes that seem to burn with soul fire, watches the boy with a golden glint in his gaze and nods slowly in approval. He remarks that Gu Yuan's steady and humble character is a true blessing for the clan, telling Ling Tian he has raised an exceptional son. Ling Tian bursts into a hearty laugh, feeling a sense of immense satisfaction. We see a father who couldn't be more proud of his child. To be praised by the great elder, the highest-ranking member of the family, is a greater joy for Ling Tian than any personal compliment could ever be. In this council, only Gu Lingjiang holds such ancient seniority. Most of the others are technically uncles to the young Gu Yuan. This includes the formidable red-haired Supreme Elder, Gu Shuadao, who watches the proceedings with newfound intensity. Ling Tian takes his place upon the family head's throne, but everyone notices that the seat to his left, the position of ultimate authority, remains empty. That specific seat represents a status above all others, and instinctively, the eyes of everyone in the hall drift toward that vacant spot. They look back at Gian standing in the center of the hall, and while a certain suspicion begins to take root, no one dares to speak it aloud. Ling Tian looks down at the assembled elders and acknowledges the confusion he knows they must be feeling in this moment. He asks them why they think he suddenly awakened the ancestor and called this supreme assembly. The elders hold their breath, waiting in solemn silence. They wait for the final revelation, though the highest-ranking elders among them already have a fair idea of what is coming next. Ling Tian doesn't keep them in suspense. His gaze sweeps across the room as he announces that the Gu family has discovered an entirely new world. He describes a high-level fantasy world, overflowing with resources and currently torn apart by internal strife. Although many had their suspicions, hearing Ling Tian say the words out loud causes a stir throughout the entire hall. A collective gasp fills the air as the elders' faces transform with a mix of uncontrollable ecstasy and pure shock. A new world, rich in resources and currently in chaos. Everyone present knows exactly what those three things combined represent. It is a fortune that could touch the heavens, an opportunity for the Gu family's foundations to expand beyond their wildest dreams. The red-haired Supreme Elder stands up in excitement, his voice trembling as he asks the family head if this is truly real. Ling Tian replies with pride, confirming that the matter has already been personally verified by the ancestor himself. The mention of the ancestor's confirmation is enough to instantly dissolve the very last shred of doubt in anyone's mind. After all, the ancestor's divine sense is never wrong. They celebrate, believing the heavens are truly protecting the Gu family. One elder laughs, noting that after 20,000 years of silence, they finally have a chance to shake the heavens again. The hall erupts into a frenzy as they imagine the Gu family's prestige spreading across the myriad realms once more. The elders are flushed with excitement, already picturing the family's great armies trampling through a foreign world. They imagine returning laden with spoils, until Ling Tian raises his hand, signaling for the hall to return to a sudden silence. His gaze falls upon Gu Yuan, filled with a father's pride, as he notes who brought this massive opportunity to the family. He announces that it was none other than his son, Gu Yuan. In an instant, every eye in the room shifts once again. The elders focus their collective gaze on the young man, but this time, their awe is mixed with a new sense of feverish intensity. There is now a deep, heartfelt gratitude in their eyes. Gu Yuan meets their gaze calmly, showing neither arrogance nor fear. He realizes he must get used to this, as such days will likely become common. Ling Tian then gestures for Gyuan to come sit. He points specifically to the empty seat beside him, and as he does, a wave of shock ripples through the entire assembly. That seat is usually reserved for the ancestor himself, or perhaps the most ancient supreme elders during a crisis. That seat is only occupied during collective decisions. Yet now, the family head is inviting a young master who hasn't even begun formal cultivation to take it. Sitting there is more than just a sign of favor. It effectively treats Gu Yuan as a decision-maker on equal footing with the family head himself. And yet, not a single person raises an objection, for they all understand that discovering a new world is a merit beyond measure. Gu Yuan certainly has the right to be there. He simply nods to his father and, without any false modesty, accepts the invitation. He knows that being humble now would only seem insincere. He walks calmly to Ling Tian's side, toward a throne carved from a single block of primal chaos jade. As he takes his seat on that magnificent treasure, he feels a sudden, profound shift in the air around him. It is as if the very destiny of the Gu family has formed a subtle, invisible connection with him. And right at that moment, something happens. A supreme aura descends from the inner valley, causing the entire Hall of Supremacy to resonate in perfect harmony with the world. Laws of the universe manifest as golden lotuses blooming in the void. The ancestor from the Bronze Valley has finally arrived. Every face in the room turns solemn. Even the family head, Ling Tian, stands up immediately to show his respect. They all bow deeply toward the space above the hall, their voices joining in a chorus to welcome the ancestor as a figure appears. Silently, the ancestor manifests upon the highest throne. "You may all rise," he says, his voice sounding dry and raspy with age. He scans the room, looking over the dozen supreme elders standing below, before finally fixing his gaze directly on Gyuan. A faint, satisfied smile flickers in his clouded eyes. He explains that he has summoned them all here today for one specific purpose. His voice isn't loud, yet it carries clearly to every ear. Starting today, the Gu family is to enter its highest state of combat readiness. All clansmen traveling abroad are to be recalled immediately, and every supreme elder currently in secluded meditation must be awakened. The family treasury is to be fully opened, with all resources prioritized to support the upcoming expedition. To be honest, they aren't holding anything back. Command after command issues from the ancestor's lips, each one delivered with absolute, unquestionable authority. He calls for the great elder, Buelingjiang, who steps forward with a respectful bow to receive his specific instructions. He is to coordinate every refiner and array master in the family. Within 7 days, the ancestor expects to see a portal capable of supporting their army. A portal capable of crossing worlds is no small feat, yet the great elder bows, his eyes flashing with a sudden, sharp, golden light. He accepts the command with gravity, just as a red-haired supreme elder steps forward, his fighting spirit practically radiating off him. The ancestor places him in charge, continuing to issue one order after another, methodically laying out the grand plan for the interdimensional conquest. Every elder in the hall receives their specific task, and we see them all practically itching for action, their excitement impossible to hide. Finally, the ancestor's gaze shifts and settles directly on Gyuan, and in that heartbeat, the entire hall falls into a heavy silence. As those ancient eyes rest on the young master, the silence in the Hall of Supremacy becomes so thick you could hear a pin drop. Even the family head, Ling Tian, watches with a mix of curiosity and high expectations, looking between his father and his son. Everyone is wondering what kind of reward the ancestor will bestow upon the one who brought them this unprecedented opportunity. The air remains still as everyone holds their breath, including Ling Tian, who waits to see how the family hierarchy might shift. They all watch the two of them, eager to know what role the ancestor has envisioned for this young man, who is now seen as the family's lucky star. Will he be given a grand, symbolic title like Grand Marshal of the Conquest just to show him honor? Or perhaps he will be granted endless cultivation resources, allowing him to focus entirely on his personal growth and peace. There is even the possibility that he might be declared the sole successor to the next family head, a move that would echo through the entire clan. While Gyuan feels a bit exposed sitting on that cold jade throne, his heart is racing with anticipation over the magnitude of his contribution. He wonders if his grandfather will offer him immortal chi, a secret technique, or perhaps a direct empowerment to skip years of training. He knows deep down that a shortcut like that is unlikely given the family's focus on foundations, but a young man can dream, can't he? Just as his mind begins to wander, the ancestor's aged and majestic voice rings out, calling his name, Guin. "I am here, grandfather." He rises quickly and responds with the utmost respect, noticing a faint, knowing smile in the ancestor's clouded eyes. Instead of announcing a rank or a reward, the old man asks a question that seems, at first glance, entirely unrelated. "You honor, do you know? Why our Gu family must conquer this other world?" It's a question that catches not just Gu Yuan, but every elder below, completely off guard. The elders exchange puzzled glances, wondering why he would even ask. Surely it's for resources and secret techniques. They assume it's to seize the world's essence and strengthen the clan, as every immortal family has done for ages. It is a truth etched into their very bones, and while Gyuan thinks the same, he knows the ancestors' answer won't be so simple. He takes a moment to weigh his words carefully before offering a respectful reply to his grandfather. He suggests that it is to ensure the glory of the Gu family shines eternally, never to be extinguished through the ages. It is a grand, high-sounding response, the standard textbook answer. Really, yet the ancestor simply shakes his head. He tells the boy he is only half right, extending a withered finger to point at everyone in the Great Hall. From the family head Ling Tian to the great elder Ling Jiang, and down to every supreme elder present, they all listen intently. The ancestor asks what the ultimate purpose is behind all their conquests, their looting, and their pursuit of power. His voice pauses before his gaze returns to Gyuan, softening with a warmth we haven't seen until this very moment. He explains that they struggle through blood and fire so their descendants can stand on their shoulders to see a further horizon. He wants his heirs to be born at the finish line, with the power to decide exactly how the rest of the world should run. These powerful words resonate through the Hall of Supremacy, causing a visible tremor of realization to pass through the elders. A light they've never felt before ignites in their eyes as the true weight of his vision finally sinks in. They had always viewed conquest as a means of survival, never imagining that in the ancestors' eyes, there was a higher goal. The goal is to ensure a genius like Gyuan has the absolute freedom to display his talents without any restraint whatsoever. It is about giving him the right to choose his own destiny, and seeing this, Ling Tian's eyes well with tears of pride. He realizes his father is paving a path for Gyuan, using an entire interdimensional war as a grand gift for the boy's rise. Gyuan himself is completely stunned, having never expected such a profound sentiment to come from the old man's lips. Deep down, he had only planned to use the family's power to avoid system risks, never expecting to be loved quite this much. He had never expected this. He originally thought he was merely using the family's power for his own ends. But in the ancestors' eyes, Gyuan himself is the family's greatest interest, and his everything is the family's everything. At this moment, an indescribable warmth wells up from the depths of his heart, spreading instantly through his entire being. He wonders if this is what family truly means, the feeling of having someone standing firmly behind you. The ancestor's voice rings out again, pulling him back to reality to discuss his specific mission for this upcoming campaign. It isn't to lead the charge or even to devise the grand strategy. The old man speaks each word with heavy intent. He tells the boy his task is singular, to take everything, the resources, the world's essence, and its very core. All of it will be his alone, serving as the foundation for his path to immortality, while the so-called Dark Sovereigns and the sources of the world's chaos are dismissed by the ancestor with a tone of absolute, unquestionable dominance. The family will clear every obstacle, leaving Gyuan to simply step in and claim the fruits of victory when the war ends. These words land like a series of explosions, echoing through the hearts of everyone present in the hall. It seems almost mad. The ancestor is willing to dismantle an entire world just to provide a gift for one youth. To pave such a path for a boy who hasn't even begun his formal cultivation is a level of doting rarely seen. Below, the elders stand utterly dumbfounded, their mouths hanging open in sheer disbelief at the audacity of the plan. They expected a reward for the young master, but they never imagined it would take such an overwhelming form. This is more than a gift. It is the packaging of an entire dimension as Gyuan's personal property. The red-haired supreme elder, Gu Shui, tries to speak, but only a startled exclamation manages to escape his lips. His gaze toward the boy is filled with a mix of envy and disbelief, remembering his own struggles to reach power. Back then, he nearly died countless times on the battlefield, yet now, this boy is being handed a world on a silver platter. The ancestor is even clearing the path so thoroughly that great elder Ling Jiang can only marvel at the disparity. He let out a long, heavy sigh, but a gratified smile soon followed as he realized the ancestor's true intent. This was more than mere favoritism. It was a calculated investment in the family's future, using the resources of an entire world to nurture a single, peerless talent. No matter how one calculated it, the profit was immense, and Gu Lingtian was so excited his face turned a deep shade of red. He stood up abruptly and bowed deeply to the ancestor, thanking his father for such foresight on behalf of his son, Guyan. He knew that from this day forward, Gyuan's status within the family would be unshakable. He was now the rightful and only future master. As for Gyuan himself, he felt utterly stunned, his mind buzzing as he struggled to process the sheer scale of the plan. His only task, it seemed, was to simply enjoy the spoils of a war fought entirely for his benefit. Imagine reporting yourself for cheating, only for the game moderator to send an email saying they've decided to give you the entire game as a gift. It was absurd, truly, beyond any logic, but that was the reality the boy now found himself living in. With eyes full of affection, the ancestor told Gyuan to stay, promising to personally forge his foundation and move him into his own spiritual residence. The boy would live there until he officially stepped onto the path of cultivation, receiving personal guidance from the old man himself. The elders in the hall were shocked once again. Such treatment was unheard of, not just in the Gu family, but across the entire immortal realm. A living true immortal acting as a private tutor for a mere mortal was a story that, frankly, no one would believe. The gaze of the elders shifted from envy to absolute awe, realizing they were witnessing the rise of a future supreme star. Gyuan accepted with a respectful nod to his grandfather, and with a single command from the ancestor, the meeting was adjourned. The elders departed the Supreme Hall with hearts full of excitement as the Gu family, a war machine silent for eons, began to stir. It began to operate with terrifying efficiency as a series of orders radiated out from the Supreme Hall to every corner of the Divine Island. Countless clansmen were awakened from their secluded meditation, and powerful experts traveling abroad were summoned back home immediately. War drums thundered and a murderous aura filled the sky as legions of armored cultivators assembled on the training grounds. Their cold weapons glinted with a bloodthirsty light in the sun, wrapping the entire Gu family island in an atmosphere of fanatical preparation. The wind was howling before the storm, and yet, the person at the very center of this brewing tempest was none other than Gyuan himself. At that moment, his true immortal grandfather led him to a place no one would have expected, the inner universe where the Gu family's bronze immortal coffin resided. As we return to this vast, starlit void, Gyuan's mood was entirely different from his last visit, and he asked if they would truly be staying there. He looked around curiously at this inner universe, where the laws of the great Tao were visible and the immortal aura was incredibly dense. It was, to be honest, a supreme sanctuary for cultivation, but the ancestor's voice echoed out, clarifying that they weren't staying just anywhere. The old man appeared beside him, pointing directly at that mysterious bronze coffin floating in the center of the universe, telling the boy they were going inside. Gyuan was utterly dumbfounded at the suggestion of living inside a coffin, wondering if his grandfather had perhaps finally lost his mind. After all, that was the ancestor's place of eternal rest, and the boy worried about his reputation if word got out that he was living in a casket. While other privileged heirs stayed in divine springs or sacred mountains, he was skipping straight to the end of the line and heading for the grave. The ancestor shot him a sharp look, asking if he was unwilling, which prompted Gyuan to shake his head frantically in immediate agreement. He realized that a true immortal's coffin must contain its own world, and the ancestor nodded, satisfied that the boy finally showed some sense. With a wave of his hand, the heavy bronze lid slid open silently, and Gyuan craned his neck to see that the interior was far from empty. Instead, it held a swirling expanse of gray chaotic currents, rising and falling as if a new world were being born right before their eyes. Deep within that chaotic mist, a small green lotus pedestal, barely 3 feet wide, was slowly rotating in the void. It emitted a fragrance so refreshing it seemed to cleanse the very soul, and Gyuan's eyes widened as he stared at the mysterious object. Even without knowing its name, he could feel that this lotus pedestal was a treasure of a level that defied the very heavens. Just looking at it made him feel as though his spirit were being washed and purified, a sensation that was, frankly, quite overwhelming. The ancestor's voice drifted over with a hint of nostalgia, explaining that this was the pedestal of the primal chaos green lotus. He had discovered it by chance in the Sea of Chaos after ascending to immortality, and it had taken immense effort to actually claim it. For countless eons, he had lain upon this very pedestal, using the primal chaos energy to nourish his immortal body and slow the passage of time. Gyuan felt as though his very breath had stopped, staring at an artifact that should only exist in myths and legends. It was right there before his eyes, and his voice trembled as he told his grandfather that this was far too precious. He wondered if using such a treasure just to build his foundation was too extravagant, but the ancestor simply chuckled. The old man noted that if a precious object isn't used to its full potential, it is nothing more than a dead thing. It had been gathering dust with his old bones for eons, so he commanded the boy to sit upon the lotus pedestal. Deciding not to be overly modest, Gyuan took a deep breath and leaped directly into the bronze immortal coffin. The moment he entered, he was enveloped by chaotic currents so thick they felt as heavy as mountain ranges. An ordinary mortal would have been crushed into powder instantly, but Gyuan possessed the longevity, immortal body. Having bathed in supreme blood for years, his foundation was solid, and he adapted quickly after feeling a slight weight. He pushed through the chaos toward the green lotus, the refreshing fragrance growing stronger with every step he took. We see every pore of his body opening up, greedily absorbing the aura, until he finally reached the pedestal. Imitating the ancestor's posture, he sat down cross-legged, and the entire pedestal suddenly began to hum with power. 10,000 rays of green light erupted at once, and an indescribable, mysterious Tao rhythm instantly shrouded him. It felt as though his soul had left his body, transported to the primal chaos that existed before the world was born. In this place, there was no time or space, only the most primitive and purest form of the great Tao itself. The ancestor's grand voice echoed in his mind, declaring he would use the chaos as a furnace to forge the boy's body. In the next heartbeat, the endless chaotic currents began to surge frantically into Gyuen's physical form. He felt as if his body were about to explode, as the overbearing energy of the chaos showed him no mercy. It rushed into his limbs and meridians, violently washing away his old self to reconstruct everything from within. An unimaginable pain swept through him instantly, making him feel as though every bone were being crushed inch by inch. His flesh and blood were constantly melting away and reforming, as his meridians were torn apart again and again. They were widened and reinforced each time, and despite his strong will, Gyuen couldn't help but let out a roar of agony. This was 10,000 times more painful than he imagined. It wasn't just building a foundation, it was a complete reconstruction. The path of cultivation is a struggle against heaven, earth, and oneself, and he knew he had to endure this suffering. Suddenly, a wisp of flame flickering with 7-colored light appeared out of thin air and fell into the bronze immortal coffin. This was a mortal fire, a source flame only a true immortal could control, capable of burning all things or creating life. The fire exploded upon contact with the chaos, turning into a sea of flames that completely swallowed Gyuen and the pedestal. With the chaos as fuel and the fire as a hammer, his body began to emit a brilliant light under the intense heat. The impurities within him were refined away bit by bit, and his blood slowly changed from bright red to a pale gold. Every drop of blood seemed to contain the power of a star, centered right at his dantian, the starting point of all cultivation. A massive vortex woven from chaotic energy and immortal fire began to slowly form within his blood-refining realm. In this first stage of cultivation, one must temper their essence and blood to condense the divine silks of life. Ordinary geniuses are called elites if they condense a few thousand, while top-tier prodigies might reach 10,000. According to the ancient records, the theoretical limit of this stage is to condense 108,000 divine silks. Reaching that limit would make one's body holy and immune to all magic, but it was considered a myth that no one had ever achieved. Until today, that is, as we see this legend about to be shattered right inside the vortex of Gyuen's dantian. Golden divine silks began to condense and multiply rapidly, 10,000, 30,000, then 50,000. The moment the number reached the theoretical limit of 108,000, his entire inner universe trembled. The laws of the world manifested in a grand harmony, as if celebrating the birth of a true miracle. However, the vortex continued to spin frantically, and the golden divine silks kept appearing, 150,000 and counting. 200,000. Watching this unfold, the ancestor's face was a mask of pure shock as he wondered what kind of monster Gyuen really was. He had assumed that using the Chaos Lotus and Immortal Fire would, at most, push the boy to the theoretical limit of 108,000. He hadn't expected Gyuen's potential to far exceed his imagination, as the longevity immortal body reacted with the Chaos Lotus in a way he'd never seen. The combination was producing something entirely new, and the ancestor could only watch in approval as the miracle continued. When the count finally settled at a staggering 1 million, the divine silks suddenly contracted, condensing into a singular form. A golden divine spirit now sat at the center of the vortex, looking solemn and bearing a face identical to Gyuen's own. To condense 1 million silks into a life spirit during the blood-refining realm wasn't just breaking a myth, it was something else entirely. This was the creation of a new legend, one that likely would never be seen again, and the ancestor watched it all with bated breath. He was trembling with excitement, knowing he had personally helped forge a true god for the Gu family inside that bronze immortal coffin. As the chaos settled and the immortal fire faded, we see Gyuen sitting cross-legged upon the lotus, his eyes still tightly shut. He looked incredibly dignified, while deep inside his dantian, the life spirit formed from 1 million golden silks sat in silent meditation. It beat in time with his heart and resonated with his breath, drawing in massive amounts of worldly essence with every single inhale. This essence was transformed into pure power that flowed through his limbs, even though he had only just entered the very first realm of cultivation. He had barely stepped into the blood-refining stage when he let out a long, heavy breath of turbid air. To our surprise, that breath transformed into a black dragon that circled the air before finally dissipating into nothingness. That was the very last impurity being refined from his body. From now on, he possessed a stainless, immortal body, perfectly in tune with the Tao. When he finally opened his eyes, 2 beams of golden light shot out like divine arrows, piercing through the layers of lingering chaos. The beams struck the very walls of the universe, and to be honest, even Gyuen was startled by the sheer power of his own gaze. They were more powerful than a laser cannon, so he quickly focused his mind to let the terrifying light fade away. He looked down at his hands, feeling an explosive strength within him that felt as though it could tear the very heavens apart. The whole experience felt somewhat surreal to him. He whispered to himself, wondering if this was truly the power of cultivation, and this was only the very first realm. If the first stage brought such earth-shattering changes, he couldn't help but wonder what the later stages, bridge opening, union, spirit manifestation, and even the final immortal realm, would be like. The ancestor's voice suddenly echoed in his ear, asking how he felt. Gu Yuan quickly stood up from the lotus platform, ready to show his gratitude. Facing the ancestor outside the coffin, he performed a deep, respectful bow. He thanked his grandfather for helping him build his foundation, a debt of rebirth he promised never to forget. This bow came from the bottom of his heart, given with absolute sincerity. The ancestor hadn't just given him a grand opportunity. He had shown him the true meaning of the word family. The ancestor chuckled and told him to stand up, noting that family members shouldn't treat each other like strangers. It was a warm sentiment, to be sure. He helped Gu Yuan up, his cloudy eyes filled with pure satisfaction. He admitted that the boy had given him a truly magnificent surprise, condensing 1,000,000 divine silks in the blood-refining realm to create a life spirit. Well, if he told anyone else, they likely wouldn't believe it. The ancestor looked him up and down, his pride growing with every passing second. From this day forward, he declared Gu Yuan the undisputed top genius of the Gu family. Gu Yuan felt a bit embarrassed by the high praise and scratched his head, insisting it was all thanks to his grandfather's guidance. The ancestor just laughed it off. He told the boy to stop with the flattery, noting that while the foundation was set, the rest of the path was Gu Yuan's to walk alone. He warned him to stay humble. The path of the Tao is long, and the blood-refining realm is merely the beginning. Gu Yuan nodded solemnly, fully understanding the weight of those words. He knew that although his starting point was absurdly high, the road ahead was still vast. Still, deep down, he couldn't help but feel a bit smug about his progress. The title of greatest genius of all time certainly had a nice ring to it. But just then, a cold, mechanical voice abruptly echoed in his mind. A chime rang out as the system detected that the host's life level had undergone a leap-like transformation. It began re-evaluating his potential immediately. During the evaluation, a series of warnings suddenly flared up. It seemed the system had detected an unexpected error in its calculations. The data regarding the host's foundation had exceeded the system's upper limit, causing a major conflict within its internal modules. It attempted to restart, but the reboot failed. A barrage of urgent alarms and garbled information streams began flashing wildly across his consciousness. Gu Yuan was stunned. He had almost forgotten this thing existed. To be honest, he hadn't expected it to pop up at a moment like this. The beginner tasks were updated, and a new main quest appeared. He had to survive the coming dark turmoil. And so, the stakes were raised once again. The rewards were issued, 3 assignable Supreme Bones. The second main quest was also updated, originally tasking him with killing a Dark Supreme. However, the new task was simply to witness the fall of a Dark Supreme, rewarding him with a complete Earth origin. Then came the ultimate task. He was to see the end of the current turmoil. Or rather, the updated task was to witness its conclusion. The rewards for this were even greater. He would receive a random primordial origin and chaos essence. The penalty for failure? Absolutely nothing. It seemed the system had finally come to its senses. Deep down, he gave the system a metaphorical thumbs up. This was exactly how a qualified support system should behave, unlike its previously unreasonable demands. It had been far too demanding before, to be honest. A chime rang out, and the 3 Supreme Bones were delivered directly into his system space. We see them resting in a void, the Supreme Bones. They looked impressive enough, but Gu Yuan simply curled his lips in a slight pout. After all, his own bones had already been tempered by immortal fire and chaos chi, naturally etched with powerful immortal Tao runes. Compared to his current state, these bones were hardly an upgrade. To him, they were about as useful as leftovers. Gu Yuan. The ancestor noticed him staring into space and asked with concern if he had hit a snag in his cultivation. Gu Yuan quickly shook it off. He smiled at his grandfather, explaining that some small things had just popped into his head while he was focusing. And with that, he took action. With a simple thought, he opened his palm. 3 Supreme Bones appeared out of thin air, hovering right above his hand. Each one radiated a divine glow and hummed with an ancient power that felt like the very spirit of the world. In the outside world, these would be enough to make saints fight to the death. The ancestor looked on, genuinely surprised to see 3 natural Tao bones at once. He remarked on how unique Gu Yuan's fortune was. To him, it looked as though the heavens had offered these as a gift for such a breakthrough. Gu Yuan just shrugged, casually tossing the 3 bones as if they were pebbles and mentioning they felt a bit redundant. The ancestor's eye actually twitched when he heard the word redundant. These were natural Tao bones, after all. They were symbols of being favored by the world, the very things every genius dreamed of. And yet, here they were, being treated like clutter. Usually, possessing just one would mark someone as a legendary first-generation being. But then, the ancestor paused to think. His grandson was already a monster who had used a Chaos Lotus and Immortal Fire to condense 1,000,000 divine silks. Perhaps, redundant was the right word. His own bones had long since surpassed the so-called Tao or divine bones, making these Supreme Bones little more than a minor addition. They were a nice touch, perhaps, but hardly essential. We see him leaving the immortal forest to return to his secluded cultivation grounds. This was a place where the ancestor himself occasionally meditated, filled with swirling immortal energy and surrounded by auspicious beasts. It was even more grand than the supreme palace of the family head, Gu Lingtian. Two elegant, ethereal-looking maids were already waiting there. These women were Taoist practitioners carefully trained by the Gu family, both at the 14th realm, usually tasked with serving the ancestor. Now, they had been reassigned specifically to serve Gu Yuan. Upon seeing the young master arrive, the two maids bowed deeply in greeting. Their eyes were filled with a mix of awe and curiosity. After all, they had watched the ancestor personally lead him into the forbidden depths. They knew the earth-shattering changes within the family lately were all because of him. He simply told them to rise and skip the formalities. He waved a hand dismissively. His posture relaxed as he surveyed the cave dwelling, where immortal springs bubbled and divine herbs grew everywhere. Even a randomly picked fruit here was bursting with life energy. He decided then and there to call the two maids Qing'er and Zhu'er. With a casual flick, 3 objects traced graceful arcs through the air, landing softly right in front of the 2 startled women. Qing'er and Zhu'er were completely dumbfounded. They stared blankly at the 3 bones on the ground, which were still humming with power. The bones radiated a terrifying aura, leaving their minds blank. They wondered if these supreme bones were truly being given to them as ornaments. They began to wonder if the young master had some fundamental misunderstanding of what a treasure was. Their bodies were frozen with shock. To them, those 3 bones felt heavier than 3 ancient divine mountains. Qing'er's voice trembled as she whispered that this was too precious. Gu Yuan asked what there was to be afraid of, calling them just a few broken bones. To him, they were just taking up space. He told them to just throw the bones away if they didn't want them. The maids felt their very understanding of the world beginning to crumble. He didn't pay their shock much mind, sitting down cross-legged to contemplate the mysteries of the million divine silks within his blood. At that moment, the golden figure within his dantian opened its eyes, and millions of strands of divine energy instantly flooded his entire body. As he lightly clenched his fist, the surrounding space groaned under the pressure, and tiny black cracks began to spiderweb through the air. The sheer strength of it was staggering. This was merely the power of his physical body, without even factoring in cultivation techniques or divine abilities. One can only imagine how terrifying the full results would be. 7 days passed, a mere blink of an eye for a mortal, and even less for an immortal family. But for the Gu family, these 7 days were enough to send tremors through the entire immortal realm. Something massive was beginning to stir. Above the Gu family's divine island, a colossal portal spanning tens of thousands of miles appeared, radiating an eternal, immortal light. It stood majestically amidst the sea of stars. Around this immortal gate, space itself began to warp and twist in a display of absolute power. Time became chaotic, creating a domain where all lesser laws were extinguished. Below the gate, on a vast martial field, a dark army had gathered. 1,000,000 battle-hardened cultivators stood in absolute, haunting silence. We see that every single soldier among them was a master of the divine realm. At minimum, they were of the 7th realm, while their captains and commanders were saints and sovereigns, true powerhouses of the world. As this force gathered, their soaring murderous intent practically stained the very sky of the immortal realm a deep, bloody crimson. Countless stars trembled, and the laws of the great Tao seemed to retreat in fear. Such a massive disturbance, naturally, could not be hidden. Every immortal power in the realm was instantly alerted. On the shores of the East Sea, within the territory of the ancestral dragon dynasty, inside an ancient palace built from 10,000-foot dragon bones, the sound of dragons roaring echoed through the halls. A majestic figure sat there. This middle-aged man, adorned with golden dragon horns and imperial robes, sat upon a throne with eyes that seemed to hold rotating suns and moons. He was the current patriarch of the ancestral dragon clan, a true dragon emperor and an 18th realm sovereign. He listened as a report was given. The scout insisted the news was true, that murderous aura was so potent it felt as if it would tear his soul apart from 10,000 miles away. And then there was that immortal gate. It was terrifying. It was 10,000 times more grand than the dragon clan's own gate. The dragon emperor fell into a heavy silence. The atmosphere in the hall became incredibly oppressive. One of the dragon clan elders whispered, wondering if they were about to start an immortal war. His voice was thick with dread. The term immortal war acted like a curse, turning the faces of every high-ranking dragon official deathly pale. The last time such a war broke out was 1,000,000 years ago, when several immortal families besieged the Gu family in a battle that shattered the heavens. The sea of stars had been broken and worlds turned to dust, yet in the end, it was the Gu family who emerged victorious. History, it seems, was repeating. That victory long ago solidified their status as the overlords of the primordial immortal realm, but the Gu family had remained silent for far too long. So long, in fact, that some powers had forgotten how terrifying that sleeping lion truly was. Who was foolish enough to provoke those madmen? The Dragon Emperor ordered an investigation at any cost to find the Gu family's target, commanding all Dragon Clan disciples currently abroad to return. They were to withdraw their influence immediately and avoid conflict with any other faction, a wise move, all things considered. Meanwhile, atop a golden divine mountain floating at the peak of the immortal realm, rumored to be a half-immortal sanctuary, stood the ancient imperial hall. Inside, several blurred figures shrouded in chaotic mist were communicating through divine sense. The Gu family had moved, and the commotion was simply too massive to ignore. It was impossible not to notice. While their goal remained a mystery, a mobilization of this scale suggested their ambitions were anything but small. The figures wondered why they chose this specific moment, questioning if the Gu family didn't fear the awakening of those ancient beings above the heavens. As long as that old monster of the Gu family is still alive, no one can truly understand their actions. They decided to watch and wait. Orders were sent to restrain their clansmen from crossing the Gu family. Suddenly, the entire immortal realm was on edge, filled with countless watchful eyes. Whether filled with awe, fear, or curiosity, all gazes were fixed toward the Gu family's divine island, the very center of this brewing storm. Yet, the Gu family appeared unnaturally calm. Patriarch Gu Lingtian, dressed in imperial robes, stood before the supreme hall with a cold, piercing gaze. He looked down at the million-strong army assembled below. He was well aware of the prying eyes from the outside world, but he simply didn't care. Suddenly, he let out a cold snort, and a crushing heavenly pressure erupted instantly. To be honest, that alone was enough to settle the matter. The divine senses of countless immortal powers were shattered on the spot, followed by muffled cries of pain echoing through distant secret chambers. The experts responsible for spying coughed up blood, their souls injured and their hearts filled with absolute terror. The Gu family was merely practicing, apparently. Gu Lingtian's domineering voice rang through the immortal realm, warning all outsiders to retreat while the Gu family conducted their martial exercises. Martial exercises? Only a fool would believe that. No one conducts a simple drill by mobilizing 3 major legions and building a massive immortal gate. But no one dared to argue, because this was Gu Lingtian, the head of the Gu family, and in this realm, his word was effectively truth. Every prying gaze vanished in an instant. Satisfied with the sudden silence, Gu Lingtian finally withdrew his gaze and turned to look behind him. We see that the old ancestor and Yuer had already arrived, prompting Gu Lingtian to bow deeply and report that the preparations were complete. The old ancestor nodded, his gaze sweeping over the massive army below as a flicker of nostalgia crossed his eyes for a time long past. He too had once led such an army to conquer the heavens. Watching the spectacle, Yuer felt her blood begin to boil with excitement. This was a cross-realm war, after all. The idea of staying home, while something so thrilling was happening, was simply out of the question. Gu Lingtian frowned at the suggestion, his first instinct being to refuse. On a battlefield, after all, danger lurks in every shadow. Even a vanguard force faced unknown risks, and Yuer had only just begun her journey of cultivation. To him, it felt far too early. Before he could finish his protest, the old ancestor interrupted, looking at Yuer with a smile full of doting affection. He noted that a cultivator must possess a heart of fearless determination, for a towering tree can never grow inside a sheltered greenhouse. Since she wanted to see the world, he decided she should go. Gu Lingtian still worried for her safety, but the old ancestor dismissed his fears. With a wave of the ancestor's hand, an earth-shaking dragon roar suddenly erupted, echoing through the sky with terrifying power. 9 true dragons, their bodies covered in blue-gold scales and their auras matching the Saint Realm, appeared pulling a magnificent carriage. Carved from a single piece of divine agarwood, the carriage emerged from the void and hovered gracefully before the young girl. This was the 9-dragon agarwood carriage, the very transport the old ancestor used in his youth, a top-tier quasi-immortal artifact. Seeing this legendary vessel, Gu Lingtian finally felt at ease. He looked at his daughter's eager, excited expression and gave a helpless smile. He decided to treat this as an early inspection of her future territory. Xuedao, Gu Lingtian called out with a commanding voice. The red-haired supreme, Gu Xuedao, stepped forward from the ranks, his fighting spirit radiating from him in waves. He was ordered to lead 10,000 soldiers of the Tiange Legion as the vanguard to clear all obstacles for the young master. Gu Xuedao let out an excited roar and turned to his troops, who responded with a deafening cry that shook the very foundations of the island. The 10,000 soldiers of the Tiange Legion shouted in unison, their voices merging into a singular, unstoppable force. Clear the path. The army charged into the massive immortal gate like a crimson tide. The old ancestor patted Yuer on the shoulder and told her to go. The young master nodded and, under the fanatical gaze of countless clansmen, stepped onto the 9-dragon agarwood carriage, a vessel of ultimate luxury. As the carriage crossed the threshold of the immortal gate, he felt a sensation completely different from the familiar energy of the immortal realm. A wave of decay and despairing laws surged from the darkness. We shift our gaze to the central province of the Xiantian continent. The ancient city of Luoyang, once a bustling metropolis of 10 million souls, had been transformed into a literal living hell. A thick black mist shrouded the city, blotting out the sun and leaving the streets in a silence so absolute it was terrifying. Countless mortals and cultivators alike remained frozen in their final moments, their bodies still standing where they had been struck down. Their faces were etched with lingering terror and despair, but their eyes were hollow, their life essence and souls completely drained away. An invisible force was steadily siphoning their energy into the sky. Delicious, truly delicious, a voice whispered from the gloom. From within the shadows came a sound that made the very soul tremble. Give me more, just a little more. The voice claimed that by devouring the living beings of this region, it could finally take that last step toward becoming a truly immortal being. It sought to surpass the taboos of the Forbidden Mountains. This mass of darkness was one of the primary sources of the current chaos. This was the Soul Sovereign, a master of the Forbidden Zone who had already consumed the northern and western regions and now targeted the central province. He intended to use billions of lives to fuel a rapid ascension, seeking to break through to immortality and become a being equal to the great taboos themselves. In a corner of the city walls, a young girl in tattered clothes clung tightly to the cold, lifeless body of her younger brother. Her body shook violently with fear. She was the last person left alive in the city, saved only by a unique bloodline. This bloodline allowed her to temporarily resist the terrifying devouring force, but that was all. To be honest, her time was running out. She could feel her own vitality slipping away bit by bit. Desperate, the girl looked up at the sky, which was entirely swallowed by darkness. Tears of blood ran down her face as she wondered where the gods or the heavenly Tao were, and if anyone could save this dying world. Just as she fell into total despair and her consciousness began to fade, a sharp, crisp sound echoed through the air. It sounded like glass shattering, ringing out abruptly across the sky. Confused, the young girl forced herself to look up one last time. We see the thick, impenetrable black canopy of the sky suddenly split open with a massive tear, and it wasn't just clouds dispersing. Instead, the very fabric of space was being forcibly torn apart by an unimaginable force, revealing a light that was brilliant and holy. A light so domineering it defied description poured through the rift like a divine sword, cutting through the gloom. In an instant, it pierced the black mist covering the city, and long-lost sunlight finally fell upon the young girl's pale face. It brought a tiny, fleeting sense of peace, but then, behind that spatial rift, a magnificent and majestic gate began to emerge. A portal so massive that words fail to describe it appeared, as a pair of knights clad in golden divine armor and riding strange beasts emerged. They marched out of the gate in total silence. There were only 10,000 of them, yet they radiated a cold, iron-blooded aura. It was a killing intent that viewed all life as mere dust, and together, they felt 10,000 times more terrifying than the Soul Sovereign. What is this? A voice hissed from the writhing darkness above the city, filled with sudden uncertainty and dread. The Soul Sovereign felt a threat, an unprecedented danger that made him tremble from the very depths of his origin. No matter what you are, since you've come, you shall become my nourishment, he declared, his brief shock turning into arrogance. The Soul Sovereign's fear was replaced by an endless rage, as he refused to allow any being to challenge his absolute authority. The endless black mist surged, transforming into a giant dark hand that blotted out the sun as it lunged toward the 10,000 golden knights. He struck down with a force fueled by the resentment and death of billions of souls, a blow meant to shatter stars and grind down the world. And yet, facing this world-ending strike, the red-haired general leading the Golden Knights didn't even flinch. A look of pure disdain crossed his face. This was Gu Xuedao, the third elder of the Gu family and an 18th realm supreme powerhouse. To be honest, he couldn't even be bothered to strike personally, leaving the task to a subordinate officer standing behind him. This officer was merely a common centurion within the Tiange Legion, with a cultivation only at the 14th realm quasi-saint level. He watched the massive dark hand descending with eyes so calm it was as if he were looking at a mere ant waving its tiny claws. He slowly raised his Tiange spear, and as it hummed, golden divine light ignited alongside mysterious runes of law. The runes flowed along the blade as a single, cold word escaped the officer's lips. Break. With a casual flick of his wrist, he struck. The Tiange spear transformed into a streak of golden light, tearing through the sky without any world-shaking commotion. It seemed almost weightless. It collided with the massive dark hand, yet there was no explosion and no thunderous roar. That hand, which was enough to plunge this entire world and every living being into absolute despair, simply began to dissolve in silence as the golden light continued its path undeterred. In an instant, it pierced through layers of black mist, accurately pinning itself into the very center of the writhing dark core. A scream so shrill it didn't even sound human erupted from the darkness, and the black fog covering the city began to churn violently. It twisted and suddenly collapsed inward, condensing into a gaunt, withered figure, a Taoist dressed in tattered black robes. This was the true form of the Soul Sovereign, and at this moment, he found himself pinned to the void by the golden Tiange spear through his chest. Golden flames spread from the wound, frantically burning away his soul and origin. Immortals, you are actually immortals. The Soul Sovereign's face was a mask of pure disbelief. He looked down at the spear in his chest, then up at the knights whose auras were as deep as the ocean, his eyes filling with ultimate terror. This was the realm he had always dreamed of reaching. You? Who exactly are you people? However, the officer didn't even bother to answer, simply bowing to Gu Shuadao. Elder, he said, this so-called dark sovereign strength is merely at the level of a 13th realm god king. The sovereign froze, an immortal, treating an old man with such reverence? And he claimed he was merely 13th realm? What lay beyond that? The soul sovereign desperately wanted to know, but his soul, his origin, and every trace of his existence were, in that very heartbeat, completely purified and turned into nothingness. A forbidden zone sovereign who had plunged the entire Xiantian continent into chaos was just dead. He perished silently and efficiently. In the corner of the city wall, the surviving young girl watched this scene in a daze. Her mouth hung open, but she couldn't make a sound. To be honest, her mind had completely shut down from the shock. And yet, for the soldiers of the Tiange Legion, we see that this was nothing more than a trivial, everyday occurrence. Gu Shuadao looked at the spot where the soul sovereign had vanished and curled his lip. That's it. The source of the chaos was this weak. The creature didn't even have the dignity to serve as a warm-up. Gu Shuadao swept his divine sense across the entire Xiantian continent, laughing softly. He noted that there were quite a few of these things left. With a grin and a predatory glint in his eyes, he counted 3 in the east and 2 in the South Sea. Several more were hiding in so-called forbidden zones, 40 or 50 in total. It seemed they were treating this world like a pig farm. Brothers, he called out, did you hear that? A roar of laughter erupted. To them, this wasn't some terrifying dark catastrophe at all. It was clearly a massive fortune bestowed upon them by their ancestor. These were walking military merits and prime cultivation resources. One soldier shouted not to touch the Turtle King in the south, while another told him to get lost. In an instant, the Tiange Legion's communication channel was filled with excited shouting. They looked at the sources of darkness across the world, like wolves that hadn't eaten in 3 days staring at a lush sheep pen. We see that they weren't here to suppress a rebellion. They were here for an all-you-can-eat buffet. Just as the soldiers prepared to scatter and begin the hunt, a thunderous roar echoed. A vast, majestic dragon's cry emerged from the massive immortal gate, instantly silencing all the rowdy commotion. An exquisitely beautiful agarwood carriage, pulled by 9 newly ascended true dragons of the 15th realm, slowly emerged from the gate. As it descended over the ruined ancient city, the very laws of the world began to tremble and bow in submission. The carriage curtain was lifted by a slender, pale hand, and a figure dressed in pure white robes stepped out. He looked down from his high vantage point at the devastated land, feeling the strange atmosphere where destruction and new life were intertwined. So, this is my world, he whispered to himself. At that moment, inside his mind, the system, which had completely resigned itself to its fate, cautiously popped up a new notification. It had detected the host's arrival. A scene mission titled, The Master's Inspection, was triggered. The objective, enjoy the fireworks prepared for him with the poise of a victor. The reward was a unique background track titled, How Lonely It Is to Be Invincible. He sat back in the 9-dragon carriage, looking as relaxed as one could possibly be. The interior was vast, essentially a mobile palace of luxury. A soft couch made of 10,000-year warm jade sat in the center, where 2 lovely maids, Chiner and Zhuer, waited by a small table. To him, these rare delicacies were no different from ordinary grapes or juice. He reclined halfway on the soft couch, listening to the system's notifications while barely bothering to look. His gaze drifted through the parted bead curtains, watching the ancient city below that had been reduced to ruins, and the Tiange Legion soldiers outside, who were like hungry wolves. As they scattered with predatory howls, a faint smile played on his lips. Third uncle and the others certainly didn't lack energy. He knew perfectly well that these so-called dark sovereigns were nothing more than a minor distraction in his mind. Deep down, he felt that compared to the true powerhouses of the Gu family, these entities were barely worth mentioning. They weren't even a main course. At most, they were just light desserts. And so, as the Tiange Legion scattered across the land, the sky over the entire Xiantian continent began to bloom with brilliant fireworks. Each explosion of light we see represented the total erasure of a source of darkness. In the east, a 10,000-foot demon formed from pure resentment had just awakened from its slumber. It let out a roar, but before it could display its divine might, a Tiange commander appeared. A single spear thrust through its skull pinned it to the mountains. Its massive body exploded into a mist of pure origin energy. Meanwhile, in the South Sea, on an island built from countless skeletal remains, 2 terrifying dark sovereigns were busy dividing the life force of the continent. Suddenly, a sword light descended from the heavens, striking the entire island. It split everything in 2. The power of the laws contained within that strike instantly erased their very existence. In the north, beneath the frozen snowy plains, an ancient sovereign who thought he was well hidden was plucked up like a small chick. Under a gaze filled with terror and pleas for mercy, he was slapped into a bloody smear. To the natives of Xiantian, these masters of the forbidden zones were invincible harbingers of the apocalypse. But against the Gu army, they were as fragile as paper. This wasn't a war, it was a one-sided slaughter. He leaned back on the couch, finding the scene quite pleasing to the eye. He sighed with genuine appreciation. Yet, just as he was enjoying this grand fireworks show, his divine sense flickered. He suddenly noticed something rather interesting happening to the east of the ruins of the ancient city of Luoyang. About 1,000 miles away in a secluded valley, we see a dozen battered figures fleeing in desperation, while behind them, several demonic creatures that had escaped from the Dark Sovereign's black mist were in hot pursuit. These survivors, whose cultivation levels were quite low, the strongest barely reaching the Tao-seeking realm, possessed a remarkably unyielding will. The young leader in particular, despite being gravely injured, remained steadfastly at the front to protect the others. The blood flowing from his wounds was actually golden. It was the human emperor physique, a discovery that piqued his interest. Even in the immortal realm, this was considered a decent constitution. Though it paled before his own longevity immortal physique, if nurtured, the boy could potentially become a saint. He hadn't expected to encounter such a rarity in a small place like this. Since he was in a good mood, he decided to casually sow a seed of kindness. Reaching for the fruit plate beside him, he picked up a half-eaten spirit fruit and gave it a sharp flick. The remnant of the fruit transformed into a streak of light, instantly crossing 1,000 miles to appear precisely in front of the young boy with the unique physique. In the valley, the boy, Mu Ziyu, watched with bloodshot eyes. They were descendants of an ancient family from the central continent. When the dark turmoil erupted and their family was destroyed, they became the last remaining sparks, fleeing through a sea of corpses. Now, it seemed their journey had reached its end. His companions urged him to move, refusing to let the guards' sacrifices be in vain. They tried to pull him away to continue their escape, but just then, a red light descended from the sky and hovered before him. It was a fruit that had been bitten in half. Everyone froze in confusion. To be honest, it wasn't exactly the divine intervention they expected. Ziyu was equally dazed, but as he caught the scent of the fruit, he felt a surge of life energy so vast it made his soul tremble. He was utterly stunned. Deep down, he could sense that eating even this half of a fruit would change everything. Not only would his injuries heal instantly, but his cultivation might even break through. This was a divine fruit. He was certain it was a gift from a god. Without a moment's hesitation, he grabbed the fruit and, ignoring all decorum, stuffed it into his mouth. A terrifying explosion of energy erupted within him, flooding his dying, broken body. In an instant, his body was restored to its peak as golden blood surged toward the sky, his cultivation climbing rapidly through the middle stages of the Tao-seeking realm. It reached the late stages, then the peak, and finally ignited the soul fire of the seventh realm. It was, quite simply, a miracle. The survivors wondered what divine being had saved them, and together, they turned toward the direction the fruit had come from, toward Luoyang City, and knelt. They bowed their heads in deep gratitude, thanking the mysterious benefactor for saving their lives. Ziyu vowed that if he ever managed to quell this chaos, he would build a temple and a statue in the deity's honor, offering prayers day and night. Inside the nine-dragon carriage, we hear this desperate cry of thanks. He merely offered a faint smile. A temple wasn't necessary, as it had been a trivial gesture. To him, it really was just a casual act of kindness. It was like a billionaire tossing a single coin to a beggar, not even bothering to remember the man's face. However, at that very moment, the entire Xiantian continent suddenly trembled violently, without warning. A presence far more terrifying than all the previous Dark Sovereigns combined erupted from the deepest part of the continent, from within the forbidden zone known as the Hidden Heaven Valley. As it soared into the sky, the very laws of the world began to wail and retreat before its overwhelming power. Even the soldiers of the Tiango army, who were busy sweeping through the remaining enemies, stopped in their tracks. Their expressions grew solemn as they looked toward the valley. Outside the carriage, Elder Gu Xuedao, who had been resting with his eyes closed, suddenly snapped his eyes open, a flash of excitement in his gaze. Finally, it seemed a decent opponent had decided to show up. A dark sovereign at the peak of the 17th realm. How interesting. This would finally be a chance to properly stretch his old bones. The Hidden Heaven Valley stood as the foremost of the 7 great forbidden zones. Rumor had it that this was the battlefield of gods and demons from a previous era. It was a place where more than one true deity was buried, where deathly energy and malice intertwined to create the continent's most terrifying landscape. Even before the dark turmoil erupted, this place was the ultimate nightmare for any cultivator. To be honest, only the foolish or the desperate would enter. Even a saint risked falling if they dared to step inside. And now, as that horrific aura finally awakened, the entire Hidden Heaven Valley began to shake violently. Massive mountains made of ancient skeletal remains began to collapse into dust. Bottomless abysses tore open across the parched, blood-stained earth, and endless dark death energy began to erupt like a geyser. From the depths of the abyss, it surged forth with madness. A voice asked who had dared to wake it, a sound that seemed to possess a dark, magical power. The mere sound of it caused every surviving soul across the central state, and indeed the entire Xiantian continent, to freeze in place. They felt a primal war raging within the very depths of their souls. Just moments ago, the arrival of the Tiange army had offered them a glimmer of hope. But now, the people of the Xiantian continent were plunged once more into bottomless despair. They cried out to the heavens, wondering what this new horror could be. The thing from the deepest part of the hidden heaven valley had awakened. It seemed they had escaped the wolf's den only to walk straight into the tiger's mouth. Countless cultivators turned pale as death, and those with weaker wills simply had their souls shattered by the sheer pressure of this aura. They died on the spot. Even the young man, Li Qing, who had just received the divine fruit and reached a new peak of power, was now white-faced. His body trembled uncontrollably. This aura was terrifying. It was, without a doubt, a presence that far surpassed even the immortals. The guards beside him collapsed directly to the ground, lacking even the strength to stand. Before this overwhelming presence, they felt utterly insignificant. They felt like a tiny leaf caught in a violent storm, liable to be swept away at any second. Then, a thunderous roar echoed through the world. Under the terrified gaze of countless living beings, the very center of the hidden heaven valley began to split apart. The pressure was so great that the world's laws seemed to groan. It was the ancient dark sovereign, the supreme being sleeping in the valley's depths. Rumor had it he was once the emperor who united the Xiantian continent in a previous era. To seek eternal life, he had sacrificed his own path. He had fallen into darkness. Old monsters who had lived for ages and knew the ancient secrets let out cries of pure despair. He was actually still alive. To them, the emergence of such a figure meant that the entire Xiantian continent no longer had a single chance of survival. With a sharp crack, the lid of a stone coffin began to slide open slowly. A withered, pale hand reached out from within. It gripped the edge of the coffin. Then, a figure wearing a tattered yellow robe and an imperial crown slowly began to rise. His face was gaunt, like a dried-up husk. With just the simple movement of sitting up, he changed the very atmosphere of the continent. The void of the Xiantian continent shattered like a mirror. Countless chains of divine laws manifested around him, glowing with ancient power. Then, they snapped instantly. Inside his hollow eye sockets, 2 clusters of ghostly blue soul fires slowly began to burn. His gaze seemed to pierce through time and space, instantly locking onto the golden-armored knights hovering above the ancient city of Luoyang. They were outsiders, completely out of place in this world. The voice of the ancient dark sovereign, Shea, rang out again with a hint of curiosity. He found it interesting that they could tear through the world's barriers to reach his resting place. He wondered if they, too, had come for this world's essence. As he slowly stood up, a terrifying aura of absolute dominance erupted, as if he alone ruled everything under the heavens. Unfortunately for them, he declared they were too late, as the essence of this world belonged solely to him. And since they had arrived, they would simply have to perish along with this world. Yes, he intended to take everything for himself. He told them they would become the fuel for his path to immortality. With those words, he raised a withered palm toward Luoyang. He pressed down lightly. There was no world-shattering explosion or apocalyptic vision, but beneath that simple gesture, something terrifying happened. The entire sky and earth of the central state seemed to be seized by an invisible, giant hand. Everything, space, time, laws, and primordial energy, began to collapse inward and vanish. Everyone present felt a sudden, suffocating pressure. Just as the natives of the Xiantian continent believed the end had truly come, a burst of wild, excited laughter erupted. It surged from the ranks of the Tiango army, completely drowning out the Dark Sovereign's arrogant display. To them, a mere Saint Realm cultivator was hardly worthy of being called an emperor. Gu Xuedao stepped out from the formation, his battle intent erupting like a volcano. He watched the dark hand descending and, far from feeling fear, he was actually trembling with pure excitement. In the next moment, his body began to grow at an impossible speed, thousands, then tens of thousands of feet tall, all in the blink of an eye. Gu Xuedao transformed into a colossal avatar with his head touching the clouds and his feet firmly on the earth, wreathed in golden flames of blood qi. Every inch of his muscles surged with explosive power as a terrifying, supreme pressure soared into the sky. It instantly shattered the aura the Dark Sovereign had been so proud of. The ancient being could only stare in shock. Inside his hollow sockets, the 2 clusters of soul fire flickered violently. He was clearly stunned to see a powerhouse of the same level. To be honest, the stranger's blood qi and refined laws seemed even greater than his own. He couldn't believe it. He was supposed to be the strongest. He couldn't fathom how the outside world could produce such a powerhouse. But before he could think, Gu Xuedao's fist, larger than a mountain, was already upon him. It surged forward with a terrifying force that seemed to tear the heavens and earth apart. "Break for me!" A roar thundered, echoing through the world as the blow landed. 2 forces of absolute peak power collided violently in midair. Curiously, the world-shattering cataclysm one might expect didn't actually happen. The Dark Sovereign's massive hand of darkness, capable of annihilating an entire realm, stood no chance against Gu Xuedao's fist of pure, unadulterated violence. It was as if the dark hand were made of mere paper, utterly crushed and swept away in an instant. After all, Gu Xuedao was no weakling, even among the Supremes. With a sickening thud, the Dark Sovereign's supposedly indestructible body was sent reeling. he flew backward like a tattered ragdoll, crashing violently into the deepest reaches of the hidden heaven valley. The impact pulverized the massive mountains formed from the bones of ancient gods and demons. One punch, just a single punch, was all it took. The Dark Sovereign, who had driven the entire Xintian continent to the brink of despair, was simply swatted away. Across the entire continent, every living soul watching this battle was left in a state of complete shock. Li Chengzhang stood with his mouth agape, his mind unable to process what he was seeing. Those old monsters, who moments ago looked like they were facing death, were now staring in a daze. They wondered what on earth was happening. This certainly wasn't how the script was supposed to go. Inside the nine-dragon carriage, we see the young master curling his lip, thinking his third uncle is still far too violent. He noted that while the man could have used elegant laws and divine techniques, he insisted on using his fists. He sighed internally and picked up another spirit fruit. He took a crisp bite. Meanwhile, from the ruins of the hidden heaven valley, the Dark Sovereign crawled out in a truly pathetic state. His chest was caved in by a massive fist print, his yellow robes were shredded, and his imperial crown sat crooked. We see his blue soul fire flickering wildly. He stared fixedly at Gu Xuedao's colossal avatar, his voice filled with a mix of shock, rage, and disbelief. "You are not from this world," he realized aloud. He realized their laws and their great Tao were completely incompatible with this realm. He demanded to know if they were from the immortal domain and why they had crossed over. It had finally dawned on him that these people didn't belong here at all. "You talk too much," Gu Xuedao muttered, picking at his ear. A look of pure impatience crossed his face as he looked down at the Dark Sovereign, much like one might look at a chicken waiting for the slaughter. He told the ancient being to stop screaming and to hurry up and reveal his true form already. His eyes looked as if they might pop out of their sockets. He truly doubted his own ears. He was the Dark Sovereign, the supreme ruler of the previous era. And yet, someone was suggesting he be treated like a mere pawn. To him, this was the ultimate humiliation. "You seek death," he hissed, word by agonizing word. The words seemed to be squeezed through his teeth, dripping with endless rage and killing intent. Then, with a deafening boom, a surge of energy erupted. A dark aura, several times more terrifying than before, exploded from within him. Throughout the hidden heaven valley, every ounce of deathly energy and resentment seemed to answer a sudden, dark summons. We see these malevolent forces gathering frantically, swirling toward his broken body to fuel his transformation. His frame began to swell as his withered flesh filled out once more. Dark, demonic patterns began to crawl across his skin like living shadows. These marks radiated an aura of omen and destruction. "I will tear you into 10,000 pieces," he screamed, his voice a jagged edge of fury. The Dark Sovereign let out a primal roar that shook the very foundations of heaven and earth. However, faced with this desperate display of power, Gu Xuedao merely curled his lip in disdain. "Angry are we? Good. I haven't had enough fun yet," he muttered, cracking his neck with a casual air. The sound of his joints popping echoed through the air. In his eyes, which shone brighter than any sun, the desire for battle only grew more intense. Around his massive fists, divine chains forged from the very laws of the universe began to coil. Each chain seemed to pulse with a singular purpose. A supreme, domineering will to crush all things. "Now, stay down," he roared, and the world seemed to hold its breath for the impact. This single punch was so powerful it caused time and space to collapse, grinding the great Tao itself into nothingness. The Dark Sovereign's pupils shrank in terror. He felt a threat of death so absolute it made his very soul tremble. He tried to dodge, of course, but he soon realized the space around him had been completely locked down by that terrifying will. There was nowhere to run. No, he let out a desperate, final howl of defiance. He funneled every drop of his dark origin energy into a single point, forming a massive, incredibly thick shield of darkness before him. Naturally, it was all in vain. With a sharp crack, that dark shield, which could have withstood a full power strike from any ordinary supreme, shattered instantly. Against Gu Xuedao's fist, it didn't even last a second. The golden blow drove straight through the fragments, continuing its unstoppable path forward. It landed squarely and heavily against the Dark Sovereign's chest. The ancient being coughed up a spray of black blood, his power failing him at last. His entire chest and internal organs were reduced to absolute nothingness by the sheer force of that single, devastating punch. His body slammed into the ground, tearing a bottomless trench through the already shattered earth of the hidden heaven valley. This time, he didn't crawl back up. He lay at the end of that abyss with only half a body remaining, his aura fading to nothing. Those eerie blue soul fires in his eyes flickered unsteadily, as if they might go out at any moment. He had lost, utterly and completely. There was no suspense left, from start to finish. He hadn't even managed to touch the corner of his opponent's clothes. The Dark Sovereign muttered to himself, his voice thick with resentment and confusion, wondering why the gap between two quasi-emperors was so vast. Gu Xuedao's massive avatar took a single step, appearing instantly above the abyss to look down on him with a cold, mocking laugh. He scoffed at the idea of being equals, clarifying that while the sovereign was a mere shadow, he himself was a true, high-ranking sovereign. He explained that a fake who took shortcuts by devouring world origins wasn't fit to be compared to him, especially in such a desolate place. In this broken land, the laws were incomplete, suppressing 90% of his power. Otherwise, the sovereign wouldn't have lasted a second. Gu Xiudao's words struck the Dark Sovereign's heart like a heavy sledgehammer. High-ranking sovereign, he wondered what these realms even were. In his mind, the quasi-emperor stage was the end of cultivation in this world. Anything beyond that was the stuff of immortal legends. The realization that the hierarchy of the immortal domain might be entirely different sent a bone-chilling shiver through his fading soul. Gu Xiudao told him to stop playing dead, reaching down with a massive hand to snatch the sovereign's broken body like a common insect. He pulled him from the abyss and offered two choices: reveal his true form and become a loyal mount for his young master, living a life of luxury and perhaps even attaining immortality, or be crushed instantly so his essence could be refined into a pill. Gu Xiudao's voice was devoid of any emotion as he told him to choose. The Dark Sovereign fell into a heavy, defeated silence. What remained of his body trembled slightly in Gu Xiudao's grip. We see him weighing his pride against the absolute reality of death. And what is dignity, really, when compared to survival? He had already sacrificed everything to linger in the darkness for eons. Now, with a chance to live, and perhaps truly find immortality, dangling before him, did he ever really have a choice at all? A humiliated, raspy voice finally emerged from the Dark Sovereign's mouth, choosing the first option. At least he was being sensible. Gu Xiudao nodded in satisfaction as the Dark Sovereign's broken, humanoid form began to twist and change violently before our eyes. Finally, after a flash of blinding light, a massive creature appeared in midair, its body covered in black armored scales and a single horn on its head. With wings on its back and an appearance resembling a qilin, though far more aggressive, it was a sight to behold. This, as it turns out, was the Dark Sovereign's true form, an ancient dark qilin. However, at this particular moment, this beast, which had once terrified an entire era, had no dominance left in its eyes, only endless humiliation and a hint of uncertainty. Gu Xiudao examined him, noting that he looked quite majestic, which was a bit of an understatement given the creature's terrifying aura. He then casually placed dozens of restrictions on the beast to control its life and death before finishing his work. Only then did he carry his new mount back to the nine-dragon carriage, calling out to the young master inside, like someone showing off a prize. He asked Yuan how he liked the mount his third uncle had caught for him, suggesting the beast should pull the carriage from now on. He claimed it was much more impressive than the 9 dragons. Inside the carriage, Yuan put down his jade tablet, looking at the beast with a sigh. The dark qilin looked utterly soul-crushed, and Yuan wondered aloud if another mount was perhaps a bit redundant at this point. Gu Xiudao patted his chest confidently, insisting it wasn't redundant at all since this was a saint-level mount. He admitted their family had a few, but a mutated qilin like this was still a rare find. Just then, a long-awaited voice echoed in Yuan's mind. The system announced that the hidden mission to suppress the Dark Sovereign had been completed and the rewards were being issued. The rewards included a complete Earth origin, which was immediately sent to the system space, followed by even more treasures. A random immortal physique origin and the Chaos Immortal Bell were also delivered. To be honest, that is quite the haul for one afternoon. With the beginner missions finished, the Worker of the Heavens system officially rebranded itself as the Heavens Vacation System. A system sprite named Xiao AI introduced herself, ready to serve her esteemed host, and asking if he required any assistance. She even offered to play some background music. Yuan didn't even have time to complain about the sudden change in the system's personality before he was completely distracted by that string of incredible rewards. Earth Origin and the Chaos Immortal Bell? Not bad at all. Yuan looked at the rewards, each more impressive than the last, and tentatively called out to the system, or rather, to Xiao AI, in his mind. He asked her to bring out all the rewards so he could see them. Of course, my esteemed host, the system sprite replied. Xiao AI's voice was almost sickeningly sweet. In the next moment, a world-shaking transformation occurred within the system space. The once empty void was instantly replaced by a luxurious presidential suite, and right there on the central table, 3 items were laid out. First was a golden orb radiating a supreme imperial pressure, as if it contained the birth and death of an entire universe. This was the Earth origin. Next to it was another orb wrapped in chaotic mist, its exact form hidden from view. However, it emitted an aura that felt both familiar to his own longevity immortal physique and yet distinctly different. He surmised this must be the random immortal physique origin. Finally, there was an ancient, heavy bronze bell cast from an unknown divine metal, etched with patterns of the sun, moon, stars, and chaotic demons. This was the Chaos Immortal Bell. Yuan's gaze was instantly captivated by it. He could feel that this bell shared a deep connection with his grandfather's bronze immortal coffin, as well as the chaotic green lotus seed he used for his foundation. They seemed to originate from the very same place. It carried that primitive aura from the dawn of creation, a truly heaven-defying treasure. He curiously asked Xiao AI about its origins. She explained that the Chaos Immortal Bell was a primordial treasure born alongside the chaotic green lotus seed. It was a weapon of pure slaughter. One ring could suppress eternal time and space and erase the laws of the great Tao. Its power was infinite, a primordial treasure for slaughter. Yuan's eyes lit up. He was currently lacking a proper weapon, so this bell really couldn't have arrived at a better time. As for the Earth origin, it was also quite useful to him. His father, Guling Tian, was in the Heaven-Earth realm. If his father could refine this origin along with the world's source, he might actually reach the mysteries of the true immortal realm, just as grandfather said. Then he glanced at the random immortal physique origin and discovered it was the source of the indestructible immortal physique. The indestructible physique focused on physical immortality, remaining unblemished through 10,000 tribulations and capable of regenerating from a single drop of blood. However, since Yuan already possessed the longevity immortal physique, a conflict of origins existed. He wouldn't be able to fuse with the second one. We see Yuan considering that this origin could be given to his father or grandfather. As he was planning this, a voice suddenly called out, Yuan, what are you thinking about? The voice of Gu Xuedao pulled him back from his thoughts. It's nothing, third uncle, he replied, finally snapping back to reality. He looked at his excited uncle, who was still holding that dark qilin, a creature that had, by now, completely resigned itself to its fate. Yuan told him he would accept the mount as a gift, though he felt he didn't truly need it. It was his uncle's sincere gesture, and he couldn't very well refuse. Gu Xuedao laughed heartily, delighted by the response, and casually tossed the dark qilin in front of the nine-dragon carriage. When the dark qilin hit the ground, its massive body made the earth tremble. It glanced up at the 9 terrifying true dragons already harnessed to the vehicle. Then it looked at the seemingly ordinary young man sitting on the carriage, and a flicker of complex emotion crossed its eyes. The creature couldn't understand how it, a dignified saint, had fallen so low as to pull a carriage alongside 9 reptiles. To be forced into service for a mere child in the blood-moving realm, to the qilin, the world had truly gone mad. Suddenly, reports began to flood in. Elder, all forbidden zones have been cleared. The east and west are purged. The South Sea is pacified. Divine messages converged from every corner of the Xiantian continent, reporting the progress of the battle to Gu Xuedao. In just a brief moment, the dark chaos that had ravaged the entire continent for centuries was being systematically dismantled. The Tiange Legion's vanguard had completely stabilized the situation. To the locals, these dark forces had seemed invincible, godlike beings beyond reach. Yet, these high and mighty dark supremes were crushed like mere insects before they could even put up a fight. Well done, Gu Xuedao remarked. Satisfied, Gu Xuedao turned back to the boy. Yuan, this world has been cleaned up. It's quite tidy now, wouldn't you say? He asked if Yuan wanted to begin extracting the world source immediately, or if he had other plans. His meaning was clear. This world was now Yuan's property. Yuan realized he could do whatever he wished with this realm. After a moment of thought, he said, there's no rush. It's not going anywhere. He admitted he hadn't had a chance to look around yet, and wanted to explore. He was, quite naturally, curious about this new world. After all, this was the very first gift he had ever received. It only made sense to inspect his new estate. Understood, his uncle replied. Gu Xuedao agreed instantly. Wherever you want to go, your uncle will take you. Yuan decided they should start with those so-called forbidden zones. Yuan mentioned that he had heard there were quite a few good things inside, having learned from his system that these forbidden zones were special. They were relics of the previous era, or perhaps even older, hiding countless secrets and treasures that now, fortunately, belonged to him. With a grand wave of his hand, Gu Xuedao declared they would head to the ancient hidden lands, personally taking the reins of the 9-dragon carriage. The newly appointed Dark qilin was also pressed into service, acting as a temporary guard as it trotted alongside the magnificent vehicle. As they flew toward their destination, the view of the Xiantian continent below was one of utter devastation and ruin. The earth was stained with dried blood and littered with broken remains, while countless cities had been reduced to nothing but smoldering rubble. What was once a thriving world of men was now silent and dead. The source of the dark chaos was gone, but the scars remained. It would likely take tens or even hundreds of thousands of years for this world to recover from such a catastrophe, a sobering thought, indeed. However, Yuan felt this wasn't his burden. He was here as a victor to claim his prize, not to play the role of a savior. Before long, the 9-dragon carriage descended through the clouds, hovering directly over the vast expanse of the ancient hidden lands. By now, the Tiange Legion had thoroughly scoured the area, leaving no stone unturned in their pursuit of total security. Every dark creature and trace of deathly energy had been purged, replaced by a sense of ancient, boundless power that filled the air. Yuan stepped out of the carriage and onto the soil, a ground paved with the remnants of ancient gods and demons from ages past. Even through the soles of his boots, he could feel the immense, raw energy pulsating deep beneath the surface of this land. Gu Xuedao barked an order to his soldiers, telling them to dig 30,000 feet deep and overturn the very earth for his nephew's treasures. Thousands of Tiange legionnaires shouted their obedience in unison, falling upon the land like a swarm of incredibly disciplined, divine laborers. They began a carpet-style excavation of the ancient hidden lands, with some soldiers manifesting their massive, 10,000-foot-tall forms to assist. Their hands acted like colossal excavators, uprooting entire mountains with a single pull as they searched for the hidden wealth below. Others released their magical treasures as beams of divine light, probing deep into the crust to sniff out the aura of ancient artifacts. Meanwhile, Yuan strolled nearby with his hands behind his back, looking very much like a relaxed overseer inspecting his new estate. A captain came running over excitedly, holding a piece of golden bone in his hands that had just been unearthed from deep underground. It appeared to be the bone of an ancient divine beast, still flickering with a trace of immortal divinity, an excellent material for forging weapons. Yuan took one look and curled his lip, telling the man it was decent enough, and he could keep it, leaving the captain overjoyed. It seemed following the young master meant there would always be rewards to share, as another officer soon came rushing toward them. In his hands was a radiant divine herb, a sacred plant at least 100,000 years old known as the nine-turn soul-returning grass. It possessed the miraculous power to revive the dead and regrow flesh. Yuan simply sniffed it, nodded, and told him to use it for tea. Reports began flooding in of divine or veins being uncovered and blood pools containing the lingering souls of ancient gods and demons. In no time at all, a steady stream of various spoils of war was being presented to Yuan, treasures that, back on the Xiantian continent, would have caused absolute carnage to obtain, yet in his eyes, they all seemed rather ordinary. To be honest, he wasn't easily impressed. The Gu family had plenty of such things, and since he'd used them since childhood, he preferred rewarding the loyal soldiers who served him. Just as he was beginning to feel a bit bored and prepared to return to his carriage to lie down, a streak of light appeared in the distance. It was flying toward them at incredible speed, and within that light was a woman dressed in a tattered phoenix robe with a stunning face. Despite her beauty, she carried an air of gloom and exhaustion, though her aura had remarkably reached the 14th rank quasi-saint realm. The streak of light cut through the sky and finally came to a halt at the edge of the ancient hidden lands as the glow faded away. A tall and determined figure was revealed, none other than the last great pillar of the human race on the Xiantian continent. This was the Xiantian Empress, Luo Bingyao, who had been struggling bitterly to support the remaining forces of her world. The phoenix robe she wore had long since become ragged from years of constant warfare, stained with the dried blood of both her enemies and herself. Her face, which should have been peerless in its elegance, was now etched with fatigue, yet within her eyes, a fire still burned. She had come the very moment she sensed a 17th rank aura awakening within the valley, and she hadn't hesitated for a second. After saying goodbye to her followers, she set out for this place alone, fully aware of what this journey might cost her. She knew this was a path with no return, a place of certain death beyond her imagination or power, yet she felt she had to come. As the last empress of the human race, she felt a heavy duty to shed her last drop of blood for their survival. If it meant buying even a sliver of hope for the surviving children, she was more than willing to sacrifice her own life. However, as we see her finally arrive at the ancient hidden lands, the scene before her eyes leaves her completely stunned. The world-ending peril she expected was nowhere to be found, and the ancient aura of death and misfortune had vanished. In its place was a scene of bustling activity. Looking toward that legendary forbidden zone, she saw something quite unexpected. In the very core where even saints feared to tread, there were now thousands of knights clad in golden divine armor. These warriors, whose terrifying auras made her soul tremble, were busy digging. Some had transformed into massive giants, using their hands to level mountain peaks formed from the remains of gods and demons as if they were simple piles of dirt. Others used mysterious magical treasures to drill bottomless holes into the earth, filling the air with a rhythmic clanging sound. Shouts and the sounds of excavation echoed everywhere, with soldiers bickering over who got to dig in which spot. They argued over divine skull fragments, yet all agreed on one thing: every single treasure belonged to the young master. Luo Bingyao watched this scene in a daze, feeling her entire understanding of the world being completely overturned in an instant. She wondered what was happening. Was the ancient hidden land being demolished? And who exactly were these golden knights? Her mind went blank as she questioned who this young master could be, unable to comprehend the absurdity of the situation. While she stood there in a state of total uncertainty, a solitary figure came strolling casually out from the construction site. It was a young man who appeared to be no more than 18 or 19, dressed in simple white robes with black hair. His face was impossibly handsome as he walked with his hands behind his back, looking very much like a landlord inspecting his property. Luo Bingyao's pupils constricted the moment she saw him. Despite her own cultivation as a quasi-saint, she couldn't see through him. He simply stood there looking perfectly ordinary, without a single ripple of magical power radiating from his body. He looked like a mortal who couldn't even lift a finger, yet Luo Bingyao's intuition was screaming at her in a frantic warning. Her heart leaped into her throat as the young man noticed this unexpected guest standing on the edge of his construction site. He sized her up with a hint of surprise, noting that she was a quasi-saint, and a woman at that. She was quite beautiful. Though her clothes were so tattered, she looked like a beggar. However, the sword in her hand caught his eye. His gaze fell upon the ancient, simple long sword she held tightly, and he found it rather interesting. The blade was covered in cracks and missing several pieces, looking like scrap metal, yet he sensed something hidden deep within. He felt a faint but incredibly pure immortal aura. It was a semi-immortal artifact, still in its raw sword embryo form. He grew intrigued, as such items were rare even in the immortal realm, and with the right materials, it could be restored. With a master craftsman, it could become a true immortal weapon, something that even the great Gu family could always use more of. After all, one can never have too many treasures to arm the family ancestors to the teeth. "Hey, you, the beggar," he called out. He gave a lazy wave toward Luo Bingyao, whose body went stiff as she struggled to believe her own ears. A beggar? Was he truly addressing the great empress of Xiantian, the last hope of the human race, as a common beggar? A surge of humiliation washed over her, but she didn't dare lash out, not with the way the atmosphere suddenly shifted. As soon as he spoke, the thousands of golden knights stopped their work in perfect unison, their movements sharp and cold. A multitude of gazes, sharp enough to tear the heavens apart, instantly locked onto her, sending a chill straight up her spine. She had no doubt that if she made even the slightest suspicious move, she would be torn to shreds in the next second. Taking a deep breath to suppress her fear and shame, she began to walk toward him with extreme caution. Every step felt incredibly heavy, as if she weren't treading on the bones of demons, but walking through a sea of fire. Seeing her hesitation, he curled his finger impatiently, signaling for her to hurry up and come closer. Luo Bingyao felt a jolt of alarm and dared not delay any longer, quickening her pace until she finally reached him. As she approached him, the proximity allowed her to feel it more clearly, a faint, ethereal presence emanating from him. Yet, it felt as if he were one with the great Tao itself, creating the terrifying illusion that he wasn't just a man. To her, he seemed like an incarnation of the world, a celestial giant of the ages. Luo Bingyao struggled to speak. Her voice was dry from sheer nerves, but he didn't bother answering her unspoken questions. Instead, he pointed at her sword. He told her to let him see that broken blade, speaking not with a request, but with an absolute, unquestionable command. Luo Bingyao's heart sank, as this Juxian sword was a supreme treasure passed down through her sect for countless millennia. It was her greatest trump card, and though it was shattered with barely a fraction of its power left, it remained legendary. It was still one of the top divine weapons in the Xiantian continent, yet this mysterious youth demanded it immediately. She gritted her teeth and summoned every ounce of her courage to refuse, stating it was an inheritance she couldn't surrender. However, the moment the words left her mouth, a terrifying surge of killing intent erupted from directly behind her. A golden knight holding a celestial halberd had appeared out of nowhere, the cold edge of his blade already in place. It hovered right against the back of her neck. A single flick would send her head rolling across the dirt. The knight's voice rang in her ear like a death sentence, telling her that if the young master asks, she must obey. Luo Bingyao's body froze instantly as cold sweat soaked her back, leaving her with no doubt about the knight's sincerity. Deep down, she knew that if she dared to utter another word of protest, her soul and body would be extinguished. She felt a chilling sensation against her skin as the sharp aura from the pale gold halberd pressed closer. The hair on her arms stood up, and she was certain that one more syllable would cause that blade to slide down. Her heart sank to the very bottom as she wondered who on earth these people could possibly be. She had come here prepared to die fighting the darkness of the Burial Heaven Valley, yet she hadn't even seen the enemy yet. Instead, she had run into a group far more terrifying and far more unreasonable. He watched her stand there, completely paralyzed. We see the woman's face turn deathly pale, yet her eyes still flicker with a stubborn, desperate resolve that he finds rather amusing. He wonders why she's still acting this way, so he waves a hand to signal his guards to stand down. The Tiange knight huffs coldly. The knight withdraws his weapon, though the killing intent locked onto Luo Bingyao doesn't fade. He tells them not to scare the poor girl. He speaks lazily, noting that while this world belongs to him, he isn't a bandit and won't take her things for nothing. Hearing this, Luo Bingyao's frayed nerves relax just a fraction. If he isn't a bandit, perhaps they can negotiate. She explains this sword is called Juxian. She tells him it's a sacred token of her sect's heritage and means everything to her, hoping he might understand. She takes a deep breath, trying her best to keep her voice calm and dignified as she explains. He raises an eyebrow, noting that Juxian is quite a boastful name. He scoffs at the idea of a tattered, half-immortal sword embryo carrying such a title. Luo Bingyao is shaken to her core. She can't believe he saw through the sword's true nature at a glance. Its origins are an absolute secret in the Xiantian continent. Aside from the successive empresses, no one knew. Even she only learned the truth from ancient texts after ascending to the throne. She knew it wasn't an ordinary object, but a weapon that transcended even saint-rank armaments. Yet here was this youth, casually exposing its deepest roots with a look of utter indifference. He grows impatient and cuts her thoughts short. He tells her he's taken a liking to the sword and demands she name a price. What would she like to trade it for? His interest in the blade is growing. It's unusual for a world that only produces 17th level saints to yield a half-immortal embryo. Luo Bingyao stands there dazed. To be honest, she never expected him to actually offer a trade. It was a bit much to process. Her mind struggles to keep up. What could she possibly want? He watches her blank expression and clicks his tongue. He assumes from her ragged appearance that she probably doesn't even know what good things look like. He begins rummaging through a ring. This storage ring was a gift from his mother, the holy mistress of Yaoqi, for his 18th birthday. It is, naturally, quite special. The space inside is terrifyingly vast, more than enough to hold dozens of royal treasuries. He pulls something out. He asks if she wants a 9-transformation golden pill. Even a wounded saint-rank powerhouse would be back on their feet instantly. He pulls out a jade bottle and waves it in front of Luo Bingyao, whose eyes look as though they might pop out of her head at the sight of a 9-transformation golden pill. Wasn't that the legendary divine pill that only immortals could refine? And to think, it was meant for those in the saint realm. She wonders what kind of level the saint realm even is, feeling her understanding of reality being shattered over and over again. Seeing no reaction, he assumes she isn't interested. He casually tosses the jade bottle back and continues rummaging through his ring. He asks if she would prefer these leaves from an ancient enlightenment tea tree. He notes that a single sip can send a person into a state of sudden realization to comprehend the laws of the great Tao. He pulls out a package, claiming the effect is merely decent. The tea leaves are wrapped in divine silk, and Luo Bingyao nearly forgets to breathe. She actually knows of the ancient enlightenment tea tree. Is that not the spiritual root of heaven and earth that exists only in the oldest myths? Rumor has it that a single cup brewed from its leaves could allow one to become a saint on the spot, and yet he has an entire bag of it, which he describes as just decent. Still no response. Seeing her standing there like a statue, he grows a bit impatient. He tells her she's being far too slow and decides he's tired of wasting his breath. With a flick of his hand through the storage ring, he pulls out a jade bottle that looks quite unremarkable and tosses it directly into Luo Bingyao's arms. He tells her this is for her. It contains 10 saint-breaking pills. Anyone below the saint realm who eats one can directly break through a major cultivation stage. He adds that there are no side effects, though the taste isn't great. As far as he's concerned, he has just bought her broken sword. Without waiting for Luo Bingyao to react, he simply reaches out his hand. An invisible force begins to swirl around them. The Zhuxian sword in Luo Bingyao's hand slips from her grasp uncontrollably, floating gently until it lands in his palm. Luo Bingyao instinctively clutches the jade bottle to her chest, looking completely dazed by the sudden turn of events. She looks down at the bottle emitting a rich medicinal fragrance, then back up at the youth who has already begun inspecting his new acquisition. Her brain completely freezes. A saint-breaking pill that allows a direct breakthrough with no side effects? It sounds like a fairy tale. She feels as though she's dreaming. To be honest, who would just toss such a heaven-defying pill aside so casually? And he gave her 10 of them, all for a tattered sword. This doesn't feel like a trade anymore. It feels like pure, unadulterated charity. An unprecedented sense of absurdity and shock explodes in Luo Bingyao's heart. She had always believed that such things were impossible. She had always seen herself as the pinnacle of the Xiantian continent, the guardian deity of the human race, and an empress whom countless beings looked up to. But today, we see her realize just how ignorant and, frankly, how poor she truly is when standing before people like these. Everything she once took pride in now seems laughable and utterly insignificant. The sword is decent enough, though it is a bit broken. The young man, Yuer, takes the Zhuxian sword and weighs it in his hand, feeling a sense of satisfaction from the unyielding intent within the blade. He turns and calls out to his third uncle, Gu Xuedao, who has been standing nearby like a silent guardian deity this entire time. Xuedao trots over eagerly as the youth asks him to find a master craftsman to repair the sword, adding some high-quality materials to make it look beautiful. He casually tosses the Zhuxian sword to Xuedao, who catches it with a nod after giving the weapon a quick once-over. He agrees that it's a good base and promises to have the family's best grandmaster smith fix it up until it's looking absolutely perfect. He wants to ensure it gives the boy prestige when he carries it out. Then, with a sly grin, he glances at the still-frozen Luo Bingyao. Xuedao asks what should be done with the girl, noting her potential and suggesting they capture her to serve as a maid. A maid of all things. Luo Bingyao shudders, snapping out of her trance as she stares at the red-haired man's wicked smile and the youth's indifferent expression. A wave of unspeakable sorrow washes over her. She is the dignified Xiantian empress, yet she is being reduced to this. She clenches her fists until her nails dig deep into her palms, her heart a storm of humiliation, resentment, and burning anger. All these emotions intertwine within her, but in the end, they settle into a heavy, suffocating sense of total powerlessness. How could she even resist? A single glance from them could erase her soul. She is nothing more than a fish on a chopping block now. She can only wait for her fate to be decided. The youth, Yuer, takes a long look at Luo Bingyao and admits her clothes are a bit tattered. However, her foundation is excellent. She is tall, beautiful, and possesses a cold, stubborn temperament that is quite rare in the immortal realm. Compared to the pampered saintesses and princesses he usually sees, she is unique. But to be honest, he already has plenty of maids. His current attendants, Qing'er and Zhu'er, are both saint-level cultivators who are masters of the arts and experts at taking care of his needs. They keep him quite comfortable, and he isn't looking for anyone new. He waves his hand, clearly having lost interest in the idea. We see Wei looking at Luo Bingyao with a gaze that treats her like a completely optional object, but then his tone shifts. He rubs his chin as if a new thought has struck him, noting that this world has been beaten to tatters and lacks anyone to manage it. He observes that she seems to be the highest-ranking native leader here, causing Luo Bingyao's heart to tighten in suspense. Not knowing what this mysterious young master is planning, she can only nod nervously and introduce herself as Luo Bingyao. She begins to say she is the empress of the Xiantian continent, but her voice fades to a tiny whisper at the end. In front of these powerful beings, she truly feels ashamed to call herself an empress, but Yue simply nods in understanding. He casually decides that since she is the empress, he will simply leave her in charge of managing this entire world. It is as if he is arranging a trivial errand, leaving Luo Bingyao stunned and doubting her own ears once again. She wonders what he could possibly mean by leaving the world to her, so he clarifies his intent immediately. He explains that from this day forward, Luo Bingyao will be his designated agent within this particular world. With a hint of impatience, he explains that her task is to restore order, comfort the survivors, and manage things on his behalf. He also expects her to collect any rare treasures or interesting items she finds, noting that she won't be working for free. By becoming one of his people, she will have his protection, allowing her to walk tall in this world without fear of anyone. He tells her that if anyone disagrees, she should just give them his name, striking a pose of absolute confidence. He offers her the chance to be his follower and asks if she accepts, leaving Luo Bingyao's mind in a state of total shock. Her brain has completely stopped functioning. This isn't just happiness, it is a revelation that arrived far too suddenly. She had assumed her best-case scenario was being a humble maid, losing her freedom and being at the mercy of others. Instead, he hasn't harmed her at all, offering a promise she never dared to dream of, becoming his official follower. She wonders if it can truly be real as she looks at the youth, who despite his arrogant demeanor, seems quite sincere. Though his tone is light, his clear eyes carry a natural, unquestionable authority that makes her believe every word he says. To her, his words are absolute truth. A promise spoken is a reality guaranteed, born from the confidence of absolute power and supreme status. Seeing her lack of response, Gu Yuan frowns and asks if she is unwilling, noting that those who wish to be his followers are many. He tells her the line stretches from the south to the north gate of the immortal realm, and he is only offering this because she seems decent. Beside him, Gu Xuedao chimes in, telling the young lady to think carefully, as this is a stroke of luck from the heavens themselves. He boasts that their young master is the most noble existence in the Gu family, and being his follower is a rare honor indeed. Luo Bingyao trembles, finally snapping out of her shock to look at him, realizing the weight of the opportunity before her. Her eyes, once filled with despair and caution, now burn with endless excitement and fervor as she understands the gravity of this moment. Deep down, she knows this is her only chance, not just for herself, but for the survival of the entire Xiantian continent. By clinging to such a powerful figure, rebuilding her world is only the beginning. She could lead it to heights never seen before. Without a moment's further hesitation, she drops to one knee before him, casting aside her pride as an empress for a greater future. Placing her hand over her heart, she performs the most ancient and solemn knight's salute of her world, pledging her life to him. She vows to follow the young master with death-defying loyalty and never betray him, her voice ringing out with firm, powerful conviction. From this moment on, she is no longer the isolated empress struggling alone. She is the follower of the Gu family's greatest genius. Gu Yuan nods with satisfaction, thinking to himself that he has finally secured some free labor to handle the world's tedious affairs. To be honest, he is mostly glad he won't have to worry about the details anymore, so he pulls a special medallion from his ring. He tosses the token engraved with the Gu name to Luo Bingyao, telling her to crush it if she ever encounters trouble she cannot handle. He promises to send help if needed, but asks her to call him young master no longer, preferring the title of lord instead. Luo Bingyao catches the medallion with both hands as if it were the world's greatest treasure, sensing the immense power radiating from it. It feels as though she has established a connection with a truly great existence, and with a wave of his hand, he tells her to get to work. He dismisses her like a common servant, casually reminding her to go and gather whatever remains of her defeated and scattered forces. He tells Luo Bingyao to gather everyone, as the trash, or rather, the loot, his uncle dug up will need plenty of hands to carry. He glances at the scarred landscape of the hidden heaven ancient land, now filled with pits and mountains of treasures piled high. Any single item there would drive a saint to madness, yet hearing him call them trash makes Luo Bingyao's mouth twitch in disbelief. She wonders if the young master has a misunderstanding of the word trash, but she dares not ask, simply replying with a respectful yes. She promises to handle it immediately, and with those words, she rises and transforms into a streak of light, flying toward the horizon. This time, however, her departure isn't one of tragic finality, but is instead filled with a sense of unprecedented hope and clarity. Watching her leave, Gu Xuedao leans in with a sly grin, praising Gu Yuan for winning over a quasi-saint without shedding a drop of blood. He notes that solving the world's management issues so easily truly reflects the style of Gu Yuan's father back in the day. Gu Yuan rolls his eyes, correcting him that this is talent recruitment, before suggesting they move on since this area is nearly picked clean. Meanwhile, Luo Bingyao travels at maximum speed back to the last human stronghold, the profound heaven's sacred land. We see a place that was once a premier cultivation site in the Middle Province, now largely ruined by the Great Darkness. Only broken walls remain, serving as a temporary base, but the atmosphere shifts the moment her familiar figure appears in the sky. As she descends upon the sacred land, the tens of thousands of surviving cultivators below erupt into earth-shaking cheers. They cry out that their empress has returned safely, and among the crowd, a white-haired old man begins to move forward. This elder, a quasi-saint himself, trembles as he flies up to meet her, his face etched with the relief of a survivor. He is the former lord of the sacred land, and the most powerful elder remaining by Luo Bingyao's side. With a voice shaking from lingering fear, he welcomes her back and asks about the terrifying events at the Hidden Heaven Valley. Not long ago, a horrifying aura from that valley had plunged them all into despair, making them fear their empress was walking to her death. Luo Bingyao looks down at her devoted people, their faces filled with genuine concern, and feels a wave of complex emotions wash over her. Taking a deep breath and gathering her strength, she prepares to make a grand announcement to the waiting crowd. She announces that the ancient Dark Emperor, who had awakened from the Hidden Heaven Valley, has been suppressed by a divine being from beyond. The great darkness that ravaged their profound heaven continent for centuries has finally ended, and her words strike the crowd like a golden thunderbolt. The news explodes in everyone's minds, and for a moment, the entire sacred land falls into a deathly silence before the storm breaks. Suddenly, cheers erupt that are 10 million times stronger than before, as people scream in disbelief that the darkness is truly over. Many wonder if they are dreaming, weeping as they realize they are saved, with countless people embracing each other in pure joy. They had been oppressed by the darkness for so long that they had almost forgotten the taste of hope, yet here it was, descending from the sky. Hope had arrived in a way they could never have imagined, and the old sacred lord is so moved that tears stream down his face. He grabs Luo Bingyao's hand, asking incoherently what happened and who this divine being from beyond could possibly be. Looking at the excited faces of her people, Luo Bingyao feels 1,000 different emotions swirling within her heart. She begins to recount everything she witnessed in the Hidden Heaven Valley, though she keeps one specific detail to herself for now. She tells them everything except for the fact that she has become Gu Yuan's follower, watching their faces as the story unfolds. When they hear that the Dark Supremes, beings who could destroy worlds, were as fragile as ants before the golden armored knights, and were slaughtered as easily as cutting vegetables, the entire crowd is left speechless by the sheer scale of the power described. The shock deepens when she mentions that even the legendary ancient Dark Emperor was blown apart by a single punch from a red-haired general. Hearing that the emperor was then dragged away to serve as a mount, the people feel their very understanding of reality shattering. To be honest, this level of power is far beyond their comprehension, leaving them to wonder what kind of great beings these visitors are. The old sacred lord takes a long time to process the information, eventually asking if the continent has truly been saved by these outsiders. Luo Bingyao nods, her expression becoming incredibly solemn as she prepares to clarify the true nature of their situation. She explains that they didn't come to be saviors, but to conquer, and that from this moment on, the profound heaven continent has a new master. That new master is a young man named Gu Yuan, and she, Luo Bingyao, has already sworn her eternal loyalty to him. She declares that from this day forward, she will serve as the young master's proxy, managing every affair across the profound heaven continent. As these words settle, the crowd, who had just been drowning in joy, freezes once more. Their entire world has changed hands. The news that their empress has sworn loyalty to another is, to be honest, even more shocking to them than the end of the darkness. A young, hot-blooded general can no longer restrain himself and steps forward to protest, asking how this could possibly be allowed. He argues that after finally escaping the darkness, they shouldn't submit to another, especially since she is the empress of their world. The old sacred lord's face pales as he shouts for silence, insisting that the empress must have her own profound reasons for such a choice. The young general shrinks back at the rebuke, but his face still burns with defiance, and he is certainly not the only one feeling this way. Many present share his sentiment. They admire the empress and are grateful to the divine visitors, but their pride remains wounded. Handing over the sovereignty of their entire world to a stranger they have never met is a bitter pill to swallow, emotionally speaking. Luo Bingyao watches their reactions, having expected this exact response, yet she shows no sign of anger toward her people. She looks calmly at the young man and asks, "General Zhang, tell me, without the young master and his divine army, could we have one?" General Zhang opens his mouth but finds no words as she presses further, asking if they could have ever ended the great darkness alone. The general lowers his head even further as she asks if they could have restored life to a world so broken and scarred. As General Zhang falls into a heavy silence, Luo Bingyao's voice rises with power, sweeping across the crowd as she answers for them. She reminds them that they could do nothing but watch as their world slid into the abyss, watching their loved ones suffer time and again. It was Gu Yuan, she tells them, who gave them hope when there was none, and who gave this dying world a second chance at life. She asks if they truly believe swearing loyalty to him is a humiliation, her eyes flashing with a conviction that demands their attention. She tells them it isn't a humiliation, but a supreme honor to follow such a great being, a blessing their continent hasn't seen in ages. Her voice echoes through the sacred land like a thunderclap, shaking the very hearts of every person standing before her. Swept up in the raw emotion of her words, the people begin to bow their heads, their faces now clouded with a deep sense of shame. She asks them what right they have to question her decision, or to find fault with the divine being who saved them all. Luo Bingyao admits she understands their lingering doubts, but promises that once they see the trinket the young master gave her, they will understand. To show the vast gap between them and Gu Yuan, she uncorks a jade bottle, and suddenly, an indescribable medicinal fragrance erupts. The scent pours out like a flood, transforming into auspicious clouds and colorful lights that instantly blanket the entire profound heaven's sacred land. Everyone who catches a scent of this aroma, regardless of their cultivation level or how severe their injuries are, feels a sudden, profound change. They feel their internal wounds healing at an impossible speed, while those who had been stuck at cultivation bottlenecks for years feel something shifting. Even their very power begins to stir as if it might break through, leaving them wondering what kind of divine pill could possibly do this. The old sacred lord, being the closest, feels it most clearly. Just one breath of the fragrance makes his withered blood feel vibrant again. He stares intently at the jade bottle in Luo Bingyao's hand, his eyes filled with absolute shock and disbelief. Luo Bingyao pours out a single pill the size of a longan fruit, glowing with radiant colors and covered in mysterious, ancient patterns. She explains that this is the saint-breaking pill, and according to the young master, anyone below the saint realm can ignore their bottlenecks. With just one pill, they can break through an entire major realm, a claim that causes even the old sacred lord to lose his composure. He cries out in shock, wondering how such a thing is possible, as it completely defies every known law of cultivation. Elder Yiming asks with a trembling voice if she is joking, but instead of answering, Luo Bingyao turns her gaze elsewhere. She looks directly at the young general who had protested earlier and notes that he is currently a 13th rank god king. She observes that he is only one step away from the saint realm, but has been unable to cross that threshold, which the general shamefully admits. Luo Bingyao holds out the saint-breaking pill, offering it to him as a gift right there in front of everyone. She challenges him to take it and swallow it before the crowd, and General Zhang finds himself completely frozen by the offer. His body begins to tremble, not out of fear, but from an irrepressible surge of excitement. His name is Zhang Cheng. As the most brilliant general of the younger generation, Zhang Cheng has followed the empress through countless battles, earning great merit. We see that Zhang Cheng is a man of remarkable talent, having reached a high level of cultivation at such a young age. He had endured secluded meditation and braved forbidden lands, nearly dying just to obtain a single holy herb, yet the saint realm remained out of reach. It was an invisible, untouchable threshold, a barrier that felt all too real as it firmly blocked his path forward. And now, the Empress was telling him that this tiny pill could allow him to simply step over that barrier. It seemed impossible. It wasn't that he doubted her, but he didn't dare believe such a heaven-defying object existed. "What is it, General Zhang? Are you afraid?" Luo Bingyao watches him, her voice calm, yet carrying an unquestionable power. "Or perhaps you think this is all a lie?" Zhang Cheng shudders and quickly drops to one knee, stammering that he simply finds the entire situation to be utterly inconceivable. A flash of grim determination crosses his eyes as he declares his willingness to try it for her. Even if it were poison, what would it matter? His life already belonged to the Empress, and if he could verify the pill's truth for her, he would die without regrets. Besides, there was a chance. What if it were actually real? The Saint Realm was the dream of a lifetime, and with that thought, Zhang Cheng casts aside his hesitation. He reaches out with trembling hands to take the saint-breaking pill from Luo Bingyao's palm, showing no further doubt. Under the watchful gaze of tens of thousands, he tilts his head back and swallows the pill, which melts the moment it touches his tongue. It transforms into a gentle, warm current that instantly flows through his entire body, lacking any of the violent energy he expected. There is no pain at all. In fact, he feels no change whatsoever, as if he had merely swallowed a sip of warm water. He is stunned. Could it be a fake? Around him, the crowd holds their breath, everyone leaning forward and staring intently at Zhang Cheng. They wait to see what kind of reaction he might have. One breath passes, then two, then three, and still, nothing happens. Zhang Cheng remains exactly as he was, a 13th-ranked God King. A faint, almost imperceptible sigh ripples through the crowd. Disappointment washes over many faces. After all, how could such a miraculous pill truly exist? It seemed the Empress herself had been deceived. Even the young general begins to show a bitter smile, preparing to apologize to the Empress for the apparent failure of the gift. But just as he begins to speak, a terrifying and peerless aura erupts from within Zhang Cheng's body, without any warning at all. A golden light erupts with a thunderous roar, surging toward the heavens like a massive volcanic explosion. The force tears a giant hole through the clouds above the profound heaven-holy land. As the laws of heaven and earth begin to shift, as if answering a call, the energy of the world rushes toward Zhang Cheng, while mysterious Saint Tao runes begin to manifest. These runes circle him, emitting the resonant sounds of the great Tao. This is the summoning of sainthood. The old Holy Lord is the first to react, his eyes wide and his mouth agape as he points at Zhang Cheng, who is now bathed in holy light. His voice turns sharp with pure excitement as he realizes the truth. Zhang Cheng is actually about to break through. In his own time, a cultivator would fast, pray, and go into seclusion for decades, facing a near-certain death just for a glimpse of this power. But look at Zhang Cheng. He simply swallowed a pill, stood there for a few breaths, and the transformation began. He is becoming a saint. To be honest, this doesn't even look like a breakthrough. It looks as simple as having a glass of water. Under the stunned gazes of the crowd, Zhang Cheng slowly rises into the air, his eyes closed as he feels the endless power flowing within. He can clearly feel that, in the face of this medicinal power, the barrier he once feared is nothing more than a thin sheet of paper. The barrier is punctured with ease, his soul is sublimating, and his physical body is undergoing a complete metamorphosis. His understanding of the great Tao grows at an incredible speed. This is it. This is the true power of the Saint Realm. Zhang Cheng lets out a long laugh that echoes like a dragon's roar, shaking the very heavens as he snaps his eyes open. Two cross-shaped beams of golden light shoot from his eyes, and the entire holy land trembles under the weight of his saintly pressure. He succeeded. He has truly stepped into the 14th rank quasi-saint realm, and yet, his aura continues to climb at a terrifying rate. It rises through the early stage, then the middle stage, only slowing down once it reaches the late stage of the quasi-saint realm. A single pill didn't just help him cross the gap between gods and saints. It allowed him to break through 3 sub-realms at once. He has reached the late saint realm instantly. A deathly silence falls over the entire profound heaven-holy land. Everyone stands frozen, as if under a spell, staring blankly at the figure in the sky radiating such overwhelming power. Their minds have gone completely blank. This is no longer just a miracle. It is something that shatters their entire understanding of reality. It is a living myth that defies all logic. Zhang Cheng descends from the sky and, without a moment's hesitation, turns toward Luo Bingyao. He prostrates himself toward the empty space behind her, his forehead hitting the ground with a heavy thud as he offers his absolute devotion. He thanks the young master for this second life, vowing that from this day forward, his life belongs entirely to him. If he is told to go east, he will never go west. If he is told to kill, he won't even blink. His voice no longer carries a hint of his former pride. Now, it holds only endless fanaticism and piety. In this moment, he finally understands what Luo Bingyao meant when she said this wasn't a humiliation. He sees the true meaning of honor now. To follow such a being is more than a privilege. It is a supreme gift from the great Tao itself. As they watch the newly ascended Saint Zhang Cheng kneeling there, the remaining human cultivators find that all their doubts have vanished. Their gazes shift in unison toward Luo Bingyao and the jade bottle in her hand, their eyes burning with the same fervor Zhang Cheng displayed. One after another, they begin to fall. Led by the old Holy Lord, tens of thousands of human cultivators drop to their knees simultaneously. They cry out that they are willing to die for the young master, their voices rising like a mountain tsunami that echoes through the very clouds. Luo Bingyao watches this scene unfold, her heart racing with emotion. She knows that from this moment on, the profound heaven continent is united. No one will ever dare to question her decisions again, nor will they challenge the will of that mysterious young master. She tells them all to rise. Luo Bingyao raises her hand, her voice regaining the calm majesty of an empress as she calls for the old Holy Lord and General Zhang. Both men respond instantly, ready for her command. She orders them to gather every soldier still capable of fighting before the sun comes up. They are to follow her to the hidden heaven valley. Without a single question, the two men immediately set off to fulfill their orders. One of the elders, however, can't help but ask out of curiosity what they are going to do at the hidden heaven valley. Luo Bingyao glances toward the forbidden area, now full of holes and craters, and a bitter smile touches her lips, one she doesn't even notice. She explains they are going to help the young master clean up the battlefield and carry away the spoils of war. And so, she leads the great army. When Luo Bingyao and her massive host of cultivators finally reach the Hidden Heaven Valley, they are met with a sight even more shocking than the last. We see that the Hidden Heaven Valley, once a landscape of craters and scars, has been completely overturned until it is unrecognizable. An abyss-like pit, seemingly reaching the very center of the earth, now marks the spot where the Forbidden Zone once stood. At the edge of this crater, mountains of divine materials, immortal grains, and ancient treasures are piled high, radiating thousands of blinding lights. The brilliance is enough to blind anyone, yet we find the young master sitting bored on a chair crafted from pure divine gold. At his feet lies the dark Kirin, now completely submissive and acting as docile as a large black dog. Luo Bingyao approaches, announcing she has brought the help he requested. She presents the gathered host to him, her voice steady despite the overwhelming scene before her. The hearts of the onlookers nearly stop beating at the sight of the mountain-sized piles of holy medicine, divine gold, and Taoist treasures. Any single one of these items would be enough to trigger a bloody war across the profound heaven continent. Yet here, they are treated like common trash. They are simply tossed onto the ground. Zhang Cheng, who had just reached the Saint Realm and felt full of vigor, finds his confidence wavering. He looks at the golden-armored knights standing nearby, noticing that every single one of them possesses an aura no weaker than his own. In fact, many of them emit a pressure that makes his heart race with fear, instantly extinguishing any lingering trace of his newfound pride. He finally understands that the Saint Realm he was so proud of is likely nothing more than a starting point in the eyes of these beings. The young master looks over the group, noting the blood-depleted old Holy Lord and the few remaining God Kings, and he can't help but curl his lip in disappointment. He finds them a bit lacking, to be honest, but considering this world has been battered to its limits, he realizes gathering even this many wasn't easy. He tells them that since they've arrived, they should look at the small mountains of treasure nearby, explaining that those items are their rewards. Luo Bingyao and the human cultivators behind her are collectively stunned once again. Rewards? For them? They stare at the piles of supreme treasures, many of which are divine objects that previously existed only in legends and myths. The old Holy Lord trembles, stammering that these are far too precious and that they are unworthy of such a gift. The young master waves his hand impatiently, claiming he has no use for such junk and that it's merely taking up space in his sight. He orders them to take it all, restore their strength quickly, and manage this world properly, so they stop causing him trouble. The cultivators can only stare at each other in disbelief. For a moment, they are at a loss for words, as the young master's generosity is truly staggering. Luo Bingyao feels a warm current in her heart, realizing the weight of this gift. She understands that he is supporting her and, by extension, the entire human race. Without further hesitation, she bows deeply to him in a gesture of profound respect. On behalf of the billions of living beings on the profound heaven continent, she thanks him for his generous bounty. Behind her, tens of thousands of people follow suit. They kneel in unison, their voices filled with heartfelt gratitude and a touch of fanaticism. He simply waves them off, telling them to get up and get to work. He gestures toward the remaining treasures, ordering them to categorize everything and deliver the rest to his carriage. Naturally, they obey without question. Motivated by the sight of those treasure mountains, the human cultivators are suddenly filled with boundless energy, looking as though they've been given a second wind. They rush forward, becoming the world's most joyful porters. Watching this bustling scene of productivity, the young master nods with quiet satisfaction. Free labor is always useful, after all. He turns to third uncle, asking if the investigation is complete and where the next forbidden zone is located. He stands up from his chair and stretches lazily. Gu Shuadao flies up from the massive crater, his face lit with a visible sense of excitement. He reports that after interrogating the remnant soul of the Dark Kirin, he learned that the next destination is the Undying Mountain. Rumor has it that an immortal elixir is hidden there, capable of granting instant immortality. This, quite understandably, piques the young master's interest. Possessing the longevity immortal body himself, he is naturally sensitive to anything regarding eternal life. He wonders why the Kirin didn't just eat it himself. He questions why the beast caused such chaos instead. Apparently, the presence inside the mountain was too intimidating, and the Kirin was waiting to reach the 18th realm. He planned to wait until he became a supreme being before venturing in. With a simple command, the young master decides it is time to go see for himself. The nine-dragon incense carriage starts up once more, with the dark Kirin dutifully following alongside as a guardian. The procession is quite a grand sight. As they fly toward the Undying Mountain, Luo Bingyao and the human cultivators are left behind, staring at the now completely empty Hidden Heaven Valley. They look at one another with complicated emotions. A place that had stood for several eras, a forbidden zone that terrified even the greatest saints, is simply gone. Meanwhile, we turn our attention to the Undying Mountain, another legendary forbidden zone on the profound heaven continent. Legends say this mountain holds the secret to eternal youth and the fabled immortal elixir. It is a place of myth and great peril. However, it is also inhabited by a forbidden existence. Anyone who dares to trespass, regardless of their power, will ultimately have their very lifespan stripped away. They would simply turn into a handful of dust within the mountain. As the Nine-Dragon incense carriage arrives at the outskirts of the Undying Mountain, everyone feels it. An aura completely different from the hidden Heaven Valley greets them. If that valley was defined by death and omen, then the Undying Mountain is something else entirely. It possesses a strange, eerie vitality. Here, ancient trees reach for the heavens, vines coil like dragons, and rare plants long extinct in the outside world grow wild. One can see them everywhere. The rich essence of life has become so dense that it flows through the mountain peaks like a literal, physical mist. Yet, beneath this vibrant scene of growth, a heart-pounding sense of death lies hidden. It is as if all life here is merely fertilizer for the mountain itself. Our young master finds this quite interesting. Stepping out of the carriage, he feels his longevity immortal body react to the atmosphere with a faint sense of repulsion. It is as if he has encountered one of his own kind, but a version that has wandered down a very dark and twisted path, to be honest. Gu Xiaodao shouts a command to the Tiange army soldiers behind him, telling them all to stay sharp. This place is a bit wicked, even by his standards. He warns them not to fall into any traps. Thousands of Tiange soldiers respond in unison, their collective killing intent soaring into the sky like a storm. Their golden blood energy burns like a massive furnace, completely dispersing the eerie mists of life that try to cling to them as they move forward. With perfectly synchronized steps, they follow the Nine-Dragon carriage into the Undying Mountain. But the moment they enter, the environment suddenly shifts. The ancient trees and vines that looked so ordinary just a moment ago seem to come alive, transforming into massive, powerful tentacles that lash out. They whip toward the Tiange army's formation with frantic violence. Each vine flickers with saint-level runes, possessing power that is truly terrifying to behold. Such force would be enough to easily crush an ordinary saint. A mere child's trick, a Tiange captain snorts, unimpressed by the display of nature's wrath. With a single sweep of his weapon, a golden blade of light 1,000 feet long erupts, instantly slicing tens of thousands of vines into fine powder. And yet, the victory is short-lived. The severed vines turn back into life essence the moment they hit the ground, merging seamlessly back into the earth. Immediately after, even more vines burst from the soil as if they are infinite. At the same time, strange roars begin to echo from deep within the forest. Stone golems and tree demons, formed from the very rocks and ancient wood of the mountain, begin to stir and wake from their long slumber. Their eyes glow a deep crimson, and they radiate a terrifying aura comparable to that of a saint. They charge at the Tiange army without a hint of fear. With a thunderous cry of kill, the Tiange soldiers show no sign of panic. They quickly form their battle arrays, ready to meet the mountain's fury head-on. Their blood energy links together, forming an indestructible whole as the golden war sabers swing, cutting down every monster that lunges at them. The creatures are shattered into fragments, but just like those vines, they quickly begin to reform and reconsolidate after being broken apart. It is as if they simply cannot be killed. Gu Chang'e watches this scene with a slight frown, noting that the place is indeed quite wicked. Gu Xiaodao's expression turns solemn as he realizes these monsters seem to be one with the Undying Mountain itself. As long as the mountain's source remains, they remain. They can be reborn infinitely, and more concerningly, he senses they are constantly absorbing the life force radiating from our soldiers. He points toward that seemingly rich mist of life, explaining that these substances are problematic. They are actually stealing vitality from the living. Hearing his uncle Xiaodao's analysis, Chang'e's brow furrows even deeper. His own longevity, immortal body's perception of life energy is far beyond that of ordinary men. From the very moment we stepped into this Undying Mountain, he has felt an extreme sense of discomfort deep within his bones. It feels as though someone is standing right next to you holding a straw. Even if it hasn't touched you yet, that predatory intent is palpable. It's enough to give anyone goosebumps, really. The mountain feels like a living entity that never stops radiating a sense of greed and hunger for life. Xiaodao realizes this place is far too eerie and decides they cannot allow the soldiers to continue wasting their energy in such a stalemate. He looks at the battle array ahead. Although the soldiers' blood energy is still vigorous enough to last for years, something is wrong. That vital essence is indeed draining away at an almost imperceptible speed. To be honest, the soldiers of the Tiange army are the pride of the Gu family. Each one is a war machine built upon a mountain of resources, and if they were to be lost here, Xiaodao's elder brother would likely skin him alive. These ghost-like things can't be killed, and they suck away one's essence like a nest of blood-sucking mosquitoes. It's incredibly annoying. The more Xiaodao speaks, the angrier he becomes, until his supreme aura begins to burst forth uncontrollably from his body. He tells Chang'e to step back, intending to level this wretched mountain with a single punch just to see if these creatures can survive without their home. As he speaks, he prepares to manifest his 10,000-foot-tall law body, ready to solve the problem in the way he knows best. In his mind, there is no problem that a single punch cannot solve, and if there is, well, then it simply requires 2 punches. But Chang'e quickly speaks up to stop him, noting that no matter how annoying the mosquitoes are, one shouldn't set the whole house on fire. Chang'e wonders if the hidden entity within is simply waiting for them to strike first. Dao, however, tells him not to worry, as he knows his own strength. He promises not to damage the carriage, assuming Chang'e is merely afraid of being caught in the crossfire. Chang'e quickly clarifies that isn't the issue at all. He looks at his muscle-brained uncle Dao with a bit of speechlessness. He points out that since this is the Undying Mountain, it must have its own unique secrets. It would be a pity to simply punch it out of existence. With his hands behind his back, Chang'e walks to the front of the carriage to get a better look. He watches the army of monsters that fear no death and continue to regenerate. Far from feeling any fear, his eyes are filled with something else entirely. Instead, we see a look of intense curiosity and scrutiny. He sees an ecosystem capable of self-circulation that can even steal the life force of others. If he could study this thoroughly, it might be worth far more than simply blowing it up. He strokes his chin, lost in thought. The mental gears are turning rapidly now. To him, the operational mode of this Undying Mountain is essentially a twisted version of a perpetual motion machine. Even if the path it took is crooked, turning into a predatory mode, the core laws behind it must have some merit worth taking. If he could analyze these laws and integrate them into the Gu family's own protective formations, their defenses would reach a whole new level. This is far more interesting than simply finding a single longevity immortal medicine. Dao, however, is still struggling to follow his nephew's train of thought. In his mind, something this wicked and crooked should just be destroyed immediately. He doesn't see the point in studying it at all. Chang'e explains that to catch a thief, one must catch the leader. To kill a snake, one must strike the heart. He points toward the depths of the mountain range. These small monsters can't be killed off, as their source is deep inside. He suggests they go straight in and take out the main nest. That would solve the problem once and for all, while maximizing the mountain's value. This way, they can also claim any treasures inside perfectly intact. Dao pauses for a moment, then slaps his thigh in realization. He wonders why he hadn't thought of that himself. He admits that Chang'e's mind is much sharper, whereas he only knows how to fight and kill. He scratches his head, feeling a bit embarrassed. Soon, a look of excitement and battle intent returns to his face. He agrees that they should charge straight in and see what's truly there. He wants to see exactly what kind of monsters are hiding in the heart of this mountain. Dao turns back toward the Tiange army and lets out a thunderous roar. He orders all soldiers to form the heaven-slaying battle array and crush everything in their path. Their target, the core of the Undying Mountain. Thousands of Tiange army soldiers let out a collective roar, their auras instantly weaving together so they no longer fought as individuals. Instead, they transformed into a massive golden arrow, led by a commander whose cultivation had reached the formidable 17th Restraint Saint realm. They charged fiercely toward the depths of the Undying Mountain. Wherever the battle array passed, whether it was indestructible stone golems, or those strange, unpredictable vines, everything was instantly crushed into dust. Their golden bloodshea gathered into a crimson torrent. This surge of energy purified every trace of evil in its path, leaving nothing behind but the remains of the crushed monsters. Although these creatures still tried to absorb life essence to regenerate, their recovery speed couldn't begin to keep up with the army's advance. And so, a broad path paved with destruction and purification was carved by force right through the heart of the Undying Mountain. The nine-dragon carriage followed unhurriedly behind the formation, while Chang'e leisurely returned to the comfort of the interior. He settled back onto his soft couch of 10,000-year warm jade, as his maids, Qing'er and Zhu, hurried to offer him peeled spirit fruits. Qing'er softly suggested he try a longevity fruit freshly picked from the mountain, which was rumored to extend one's life by 600 years. Chang'e picked up the translucent, fragrant fruit and gave it a brief look, which, as it turns out, was all the attention it would get. He tossed it aside with a look of pure disdain, remarking that stolen, second-hand life force couldn't possibly taste any good. Possessing the longevity immortal body, he felt an instinctive disgust for anything fueled by plunder. Nearby, the dark Kirin watched this play out. Her eyelids twitched at the sight. To her, that longevity fruit was one of the most precious treasures within the Undying Mountain. She had eaten them herself in the past, knowing they were miraculous even for saints. Without such luck, she might not have survived this long. And yet, this young master was actually complaining about the flavor, treating a legendary treasure like common trash. He called it second-hand life force, but in her mind, survival was all that mattered. While she questioned her reality, the carriage suddenly jolted. The nine-dragon carriage came to a sudden halt, signaling that they had reached a very specific destination. Before them lay a lake that wasn't clear, but a strange, milky white. A thin mist drifted over the surface, eerily calm. It radiated a life aura 100 times stronger than anything they had felt before. And there, in the center, sat a tiny island. On the island, we see a small tree that appears to be carved from pure emerald, glowing with a vibrant, flowing green light. Hanging from its branches is a fruit the size of a fist, shaped remarkably like a tiny infant, and it seems to be softly breathing. With every rhythmic breath it takes, the waters of the entire lake rise and fall in perfect synchronization. That incredible energy was indeed radiating from the fruit, the longevity, immortal medicine, as Gu Shuidao's voice rang out, filled with shock and ecstasy. Outside, he shouted that they had found it. Chang'e stood on the carriage deck, narrowing his eyes as he observed the scene. He studied the emerald tree and that infant-shaped fruit, and he could clearly sense the power within it. The life energy contained inside that single fruit was vast, reaching a level that was, frankly, quite hard to believe. It was even purer and more abundant than the true immortal essence his grandfather had given him. To be honest, that is saying a lot. He realized he might need to reach the saint realm himself to possess such vitality, wondering how many lives were sacrificed to nourish this single medicine. Gu Shuidao rubbed his hands together, telling Yuan they had hit the jackpot. He was truly beside himself with greed. His face was flushed with excitement, and he was nearly drooling as he stared at the fruit with an intensity that was a bit unsettling. His gaze was like that of a starving man seeing a feast. He stammered that this was the legendary humanoid immortal medicine. It appeared fully mature. If a supreme were to consume it, they might even touch the threshold of the heaven and earth realm. Gu Shuidao grew more excited by the second, looking as though he wanted to rush over and swallow it whole. And he wasn't the only one. Behind him, the soldiers of the Tiange army were breathing heavily, their eyes filled with a wild, feverish heat. An immortal medicine, after all. This was the stuff of myths. They had conquered countless worlds and seen many treasures, but nothing quite like this. It was their first time seeing a treasure of this grade. They never expected such a prize in a world that didn't even have its own supreme. However, Gu Shuidao was a supreme for a reason, and he possessed an extraordinary level of self-control when it mattered. He quickly snapped out of his ecstasy and roared at his men, forcing the overexcited soldiers to regain their senses. They all shuddered as he warned them that the greater the treasure, the more dangerous its guardian would be. A fair point, really. Yuan scanned the eerie, milky white lake with a heavy gaze, feeling that the water itself possessed an extremely dangerous aura. Chang'e spoke up, his voice calm, yet commanding enough to silence the crowd as he agreed that his uncle was right about the lake. There was a problem. He pointed toward the seemingly harmless white waters, noting that what lay beneath wasn't actually life energy. It wasn't a miracle of life at all, but rather the purest essence of longevity. This entire undying mountain was a massive trap. It used these vibrant scenes to lure outsiders in, silently stealing their life force to nourish the immortal medicine at the center. Everything eventually gathered in this lake. His explanation sent a collective shiver down the spines of everyone present. Stealing one's lifespan was far more terrifying than a quick death. After all, what does a cultivator fear most? It is the exhaustion of their life force, turning into a pile of yellow dust in utter despair. It was a truly vicious scheme. Gu Shuidao looked pale after hearing this. In his earlier excitement, he had nearly fallen right into the trap. Yes, quite a close call. Had he rushed over recklessly, even a supreme expert like himself would have suffered greatly in a lake designed to drain life. With his vast lifespan, he likely would have fully ripened that longevity medicine in the blink of an eye, which was exactly the point. Then, the mastermind could simply take the prize and flee, or perhaps even use it to ascend to the throne of heaven and earth. Gu Shuidao admitted with lingering fear that Chang'e's observation was sharp, noting that the longevity immortal body certainly had its perks. He was growing more impressed by his nephew, whose insight surpassed even his own, despite his tens of thousands of years of experience. He asked what they should do next, suggesting that he could simply use his magical power to evaporate the entire lake. Chang'e stopped his violent uncle once again. To him, this lake water was actually a very precious resource. We see his eyes glinting as he looked at the milky lake. This was, in essence, the purest concentration of stolen life force. Though it was stolen, if they could purify the impurities and resentment within, it would become the ultimate longevity supplement. Taking it back to the family ancestors whose lives were fading would grant each of them at least tens of thousands of extra years. It was useless to him personally, but he had a large clan to consider, specifically those old monsters of the Gu family sleeping in the Forbidden Lands. Many of those ancestors were nearing the end of their natural lives, relying on deep slumber to slow the inevitable. This lake's essence changed everything. With this, the Gu family's hidden foundations would surely skyrocket. Gu Shuidao's eyes lit up at the realization this was a true treasure. It seemed as if this place was tailor-made for their clan. Perhaps the lake even had the name Gu written on it. Chang'e simply nodded. He suggested they focus on securing the immortal medicine first. Shuidao beat his chest, volunteering to handle the task himself. He wanted to see exactly what kind of ghost was playing tricks here. With a single step, he reached the shore, releasing his terrifying supreme pressure. He unleashed his power without reservation, crushing down toward the island. He roared for whatever was hiding to get out as the lake erupted. Under Shuidao's overwhelming might, the water instantly surged into monstrous waves. However, the reaction wasn't quite what we expected. The island remained eerily calm. That small tree and its fruit seemed completely unaffected, as if the storm around them didn't exist. Still refusing to show yourself? Shuidao's brow furrowed, feeling his dignity provoked. He let out a cold snort and raised his hand high. He struck the surface with a palm. Though not at full strength, it was a blow powerful enough to shatter a star in the sky. And then, a truly bizarre scene unfolded. The moment that world-destroying palm touched the milky white water, something went wrong. The energy simply dissolved in total silence. It was like a clay ox entering the sea, disappearing without leaving so much as a ripple. Suddenly, the leaves of the small tree began to rustle despite the lack of wind. Then, a voice drifted from the island, old, weary, and distant. It was the voice of someone who had seen too many ages pass. It sighed, lamenting that after so many years, someone had disturbed its peace again. The voice warned the outsiders to leave, stating this was no place for them. Longevity, it claimed, was a forbidden secret they shouldn't covet. The voice wasn't loud, yet it echoed clearly in the depths of everyone's soul. Hearing this, Xiaodao didn't back down for a second. Instead, his fighting spirit surged even higher. He cursed the hidden figure as a coward, demanding they come out and face their death. Chang'e spoke up then, his voice clear as he offered a deal. The island fell silent for a moment as the entity processed the word deal. The ancient voice returned, tinged with a hint of doubt and disdain, asking what a mere youth could possibly offer that it needed. He replied slowly, one word at a time, promising the entity true longevity. This statement stunned not just the being on the island, but everyone present. Even Gu Xiaodao and the Dark Qilin were left stunned by the offer. To promise someone true longevity, well, that was a bold claim indeed. It sounded like a bit of an exaggeration, didn't it? After all, longevity is the ultimate path that even true immortals spend eons chasing. To the world, Chang'e was merely a young cultivator at the blood transformation stage, far from such divine secrets. And yet, with the Gu family and the immense power backing him, he offered a glimpse of the true path to eternal life. It was a gamble. After those words were spoken, the entity on Foxstar Island fell into a long silence, seemingly lost in deep thought. It seemed to be weighing the truth of the statement. Finally, a soft chuckle drifted out. The voice called him an interesting little fellow. The voice invited him in, saying it would wait right there. As the words faded, the milky white waters of the lake began to stir. The lake actually parted down the middle, revealing a direct path to the island. Xiaodao, however, was far from convinced this was safe. Seeing the water divide, Xiaodao's expression darkened as he stepped in front of Chang'e. He was certain the old monster had ill intentions. Who knew what traps lay beneath that lake? To him, this was a clear setup, with the entity waiting to spring a deadly snare on the island. He feared Chang'e was walking straight into a net, but the young man simply looked on with total indifference, asking his uncle why he was so worried. He gently pushed Xiaodao aside, noting that with a supreme expert like him acting as a bodyguard, there surely couldn't be any real danger. Besides, as the saying goes, one cannot catch the tiger's cub without entering the den. He patted Xiaodao's shoulder with complete confidence. He told his uncle not to worry, as he knew exactly what he was doing. Xiaodao opened his mouth to argue, but found himself at a loss for words. He realized that as long as he was there, no one should be able to hurt the boy, unless an actual immortal appeared in this desolate place. And since an immortal appearing here seemed impossible, he simply told Chang'e to stay close and be careful. It was all he could do. Xiaodao decided that if the old monster made even the slightest suspicious move, he would strike instantly, regardless of the medicine. He was ready to turn the entity to ash first and ask questions later. Chang'e nodded and began to walk leisurely down the watery path. Xiaodao followed closely behind, his muscles tense and his supreme power circulating rapidly through his body, ready for a fight. He was prepared to unleash a thunderous blow at a moment's notice. After a brief hesitation, the Dark Qilin decided to follow them in. The Dark Qilin realized they were now in the same boat. If anything happened to Chang'e, he wouldn't survive either, and besides, he was curious. He wanted to know what was truly hidden in Mount Immortality, a place even he hadn't dared to enter back in the day. As the group moved forward, under the tense gaze of thousands of soldiers from the Tiange Legion, we see them walk into the depths of the lake along the parted path. The moment they stepped onto the passage, the force-stealing life essence grew 1,000 times stronger, like countless invisible hands reaching out. These spectral hands seemed to tear at Chang'e's soul, trying to pull his life source from his body, though they were held back by their master. They could only watch from a distance, not daring to approach. To be honest, the sheer intensity of the power was staggering to behold. He sensed that if an ordinary cultivator of the divine path were to stand here, they would be drained into a withered husk within seconds. Surprisingly, he felt a slight resonance between this power and his own longevity immortal body, as if they shared a common origin. This likely explained that strange mix of familiarity and disgust he felt earlier. It was getting interesting, and his curiosity only deepened. The path was short, and we soon find him reaching the island at the lake's center, where a glowing, human-shaped spirit tree stood. Beside the small tree sat a massive, weathered green rock. Upon it sat an old Taoist with white hair, dressed in a gray robe. His face was gaunt and withered, and his aura was so faint it felt as though he might drift away with the wind at any moment. With eyes tightly shut, his body was entwined by numerous chains of law, condensed entirely from the stolen power of life essence. The other ends of these chains were rooted deep into Mount Immortality beneath his feet, binding him to the very earth itself. He seemed to have merged with the mountain. He was the mountain, and the mountain was him, a peak 18th realm supreme. The moment Gu Shuadao saw the old Taoist, his pupils contracted in shock. The old monster's strength was far greater than he had imagined. He had heard the Qilin was the strongest in this world, so where did this entity come from? To be fair, the situation was becoming quite complicated. The way the old man's aura fused with the mountain and the heavenly Tao made him feel this would be a very difficult opponent to handle. The old Taoist slowly opened his eyes so cloudy and dim that they held no spark of life, only the weight of endless eons. His gaze bypassed Shuadao entirely, landing directly on Chang'e. You have arrived. The voice seemed to echo from the depths of time. The longevity, immortal body. What a nostalgic scent, the old Taoist remarked as he looked at Chang'e with a complex expression. There was nostalgia, envy, and even a hint of jealousy in his eyes. So it really is you, Chang'e replied with a calm smile. He finally understood why that power felt so familiar. Allow me to introduce myself, the old man said. My Taoist title is Longevity. To be honest, the name didn't quite fit his current state, clinging to a half-dead existence by stealing the life essence of others. You call this longevity? Chang'e mocked him without hesitation. This isn't living. It's just a long, drawn-out punishment. A flicker of genuine anger finally appeared on the Taoist longevity's withered face, which had remained calm for countless eons. In all his long life, it was the first time anyone had dared to speak to him this way. Junior, watch your tongue, he hissed. A terrifying, crushing pressure erupted from his body, surging toward Chang'e. However, Gu Shuadao merely let out a cold snort. The aura of a supreme exploded from Shuadao, instantly shattering the old man's pressure into pieces. You old fossil, Shuadao growled. How dare you act so insolently in front of my young master? Shuadao stepped forward, shielding Chang'e with a murderous glare. The Taoist's expression shifted instantly. He began to reevaluate the red-haired man standing before him, who had seemed so ordinary. A supreme. He could feel a power radiating from Gu Shuadao that was every bit as terrifying as his own. Yet another 18th Realm Supreme had appeared. A trace of wariness flickered within the Taoist's cloudy, ancient eyes. He could sense that although this red-haired warrior shared his peak rank, their foundations were worlds apart. Shuadao's bloodline power was as refined as a furnace, born purely for battle, a stark contrast to the old man's borrowed life. It was far more vibrant than his own decaying strength. What truly shocked him, however, was this powerful warrior's behavior. This mighty supreme was acting as a humble, loyal guardian to a mere boy. Chang'e's background was clearly deeper than he imagined. Third uncle, there's no need to be so tense. Chang'e's voice drifted calmly from behind Shuadao's massive frame. He casually stepped around his uncle to face the Taoist once more. I only came here to have a chat, not to start a war. Wouldn't you agree, Taoist? Chang'e asked. The old man suppressed his inner turmoil and gave the youth a long, searching look. The old man remained silent, but Chang'e didn't seem to mind as he began to circle the small, tree-like immortal medicine, examining it closely. He remarked that it was a truly genius design, using his own longevity body as the array's core, connected directly to the mountain's ley lines. By setting up a heavenly array to steal the life essence of all living things, he had funneled everything here to nourish this life-extending medicine. It was a self-sustaining cycle. As long as this world continued to exist, he could theoretically keep living this way forever. Suddenly, Chang'e's smile vanished, replaced by a look of cold disdain as he noted that this wasn't actually longevity at all. He told the Taoist that this was more like a prison sentence, where he had turned himself into a captive of the world's natural laws. Being one with the mountains and the heavens sounded impressive, but Chang'e asked if he even dared to take a single step off this mountain. He knew the Taoist wouldn't dare leave this world, because the moment he did, this entire system of stolen essence would instantly collapse. His decaying body would turn to ash in a heartbeat. These words were like sharp blades, cutting straight into the Taoist's deepest insecurities. We see the Taoist longevity's expression shift instantly, turning incredibly grim as Chang'e's observations hit their mark. Nonsense, the old man barked, though his voice betrayed a certain hollow weakness that suggested he knew the truth. Chang'e laughed, a sound filled with mockery, and explained that true longevity meant being detached, free, and existing beyond the three realms. Real immortality meant viewing the laws of heaven and earth as mere tools and the river of time as nothing more than a passing shadow. Instead, the Taoist had bound himself to the laws of this small, broken world, living like a parasite sucking on its lifeblood. If the world lived, he lived, but if the world perished, he would go down with it. To be honest, that hardly sounds like a divine existence. Chang'e called him nothing more than a watchdog for the heavens, causing the Taoist to tremble violently as he shouted for him to shut up. The chains of law surrounding him began to shake frantically, and the entire undying mountain groaned and trembled under the strain. He was utterly enraged, as every one of Chang'e's words poked at a wound he had tried to ignore for countless ages. For so long, he had convinced himself that he was walking a grand path toward eternity, believing that with enough time, he would succeed. He felt he was destined to reach the 19th realm, even sensing that he was only half a step away from that dream. What do you know? The Taoist longevity roared, his voice trembling with rage as he accused Chang'e of simply relying on his innate talent and immortal physique. He claimed Chang'e had no right to judge his path, boasting that when he first attained his Tao, Chang'e's ancestors hadn't even been born yet. Chang'e simply raised an eyebrow, the mockery on his face deepening as he noted that living a long time doesn't mean one is walking the right path. He pointed out that a pig who lives for 10,000 years is still just a pig, not a dragon, a comment that made the Dark Qilin nearly choke on a laugh. Ignoring their reactions, Chang'e continued, explaining that the Taoist hadn't just lost his own way, but had led the entire world down a crooked path as well. The Taoist's pupils contracted sharply as he demanded to know what Chang'e meant by such a bold accusation. With a cold sneer, Chang'e asked if the old man truly believed his secret manipulations could remain hidden from everyone forever as he slowly raised his hand. He gestured toward the silent Dark Qilin, suggesting the Taoist ask him about the time he tried to break through to the Supreme Realm. Chang'e asked if it hadn't felt as though his Tao was flawed and the laws incomplete, as if an invisible shackle was holding him back. Upon hearing this, the Dark Qilin's massive body shuddered violently, and he looked up with a start. He looked at Chang'e in disbelief before turning a suspicious, uncertain gaze toward the Taoist, realizing the truth in those words. Back then, he had practiced in the hidden Heaven Valley, devouring countless spirits to condense his supreme Tao fruit, yet the process was agonizingly difficult. He had assumed his own bloodline was simply impure, which is why he attempted to trigger the dark turmoil, using all living things to extend his life. But now, hearing Chang'e's explanation, he realized this struggle might have been artificially engineered by someone else's hand. Chang'e's voice became like a devil's whisper, echoing in their ears as he spoke of how every dark turmoil had swept across the continent. He suggested that every time the Qilin devoured endless lives, there was a hidden force at work behind the scenes. The Qilin remembered it then, how every time he consumed enough life force, he would enter a strange, transcendent state of mind. It felt as though he were merging with the world's heavenly will, causing his power to explode, which only made him crave that sensation more. He had believed that by devouring enough, he could reach the 18th realm, but now that the veil was lifted, the truth felt much darker. Looking back, that feeling of power was less like divine ascension and more like being a puppet on a string, and the Taoist was the one pulling them. The Dark Qilin whipped his head around, staring fixedly at the Taoist longevity as his crimson eyes erupted with endless fury and killing intent. "So this was all you're doing," he roared, while the Taoist stared back at the maddened Qilin with a withered, ancient face. For the first time, the old man's calm mask was torn to shreds by a few simple words, and he fell into a heavy silence. And as we know, in a moment like this, silence is the loudest answer possible, a realization that made Chang'e burst into laughter. He mocked the Taoist, calling him a supposed paragon of the ancient righteous path who had lost his way and couldn't transcend. Chang'e accused him of a truly sinister plot, deliberately tampering with the world's cultivation methods so that every living being would suffer. From the very moment they stepped onto the path of immortality, their foundations were designed to be fundamentally flawed. He noted that even a beast like this Qilin shouldn't need a dark turmoil every few millennia. It simply didn't make sense. Chang'e's gaze pierced through the Taoist like twin divine swords as he explained the old man's need for someone with peerless talent. The Taoist needed a perfect vessel who could reach the peak of the supreme realm while harboring a fatal, hidden defect. Then, at the most critical moment, he would devour them, using their vast life essence and potential as fuel to ignite his own Tao fire. This would allow him to sever his ties to this world, fix his own flaws, and ascend to the heavens in a single bound. He had intended to step into the legendary realm of heaven and earth, and the Qilin was his chosen prey, or so Chang'e claimed. These words struck like thunder from the highest heavens, leaving the Dark Qilin's massive body trembling with violent tremors. He looked at the Taoist, his eyes filled with an unbelievable terror and a hatred that could swallow the very sky. It turned out that the strength he took pride in and the path he fought for his entire life were nothing more than a calculated scam. He wasn't some dark, ancient emperor. He was merely a beast kept in a pen, and the shock of it shattered his very soul. The Dark Qilin coughed up a mouthful of purple-black blood, his aura instantly withering as his Tao heart began to crumble. His will was completely broken by Chang'e's revelation, yet strangely enough, the Taoist longevity actually began to calm down. On that withered, old face, the anger, shock, and resentment slowly faded away, replaced by something far more chilling. It was a calm, so cold it felt frozen. He looked at Chang'e and slowly peeled back his lips, revealing a row of yellowed, decaying teeth. Everything you said is true, he admitted quite frankly. To be honest, he seemed impressed by the insight of the longevity, immortal body. He noted that his own longevity body was not only born noble, but possessed a vision and wisdom far beyond these common, worldly creatures. He glanced at the Dark Qilin coughing blood on the ground with utter disdain, as if he were looking at a pile of useless trash. Yes, he confirmed it all. That stupid beast was indeed the vessel he had prepared for hundreds of thousands of years, but its bloodline was too impure to be truly useful. The old man had been worrying about where to find a better replacement, and now, his gaze fell back onto Chang'e. That look in his eyes, It was no longer hidden behind a mask. There was only naked, wolf-like greed and a terrifying fanaticism. He hadn't expected this at all. He marveled at his luck, believing the heavens were on his side after all, just when he thought his life's work had been for nothing. Just as his path seemed hopeless, a new prize had delivered itself. He rose slowly from the blue stone, dismissing the impure beast on the ground. A flawed creature couldn't compare to a flawless longevity immortal body that perfectly matched his own great Tao. Compared to Chang'e, that Qilin, the beast wasn't even fit to be a snack. "Junior, I must thank you," he said, thanking him for the wake-up call and for what came next. He thanked Chang'e for delivering the ultimate ladder to ascend the heavens. As his voice fell, the entirety of Mount Undying began to shake. The entire lake of longevity reached a boiling point in that moment, as a terrifying aura far beyond anything seen before began to surge. The power erupted from the Taoist longevity like a volcano. His true nature was finally exposed, and he was holding nothing back now. In those murky eyes, an unprecedented greed and madness flared up as he stood up completely from his seat on the blue stone. With that single movement, we see the entire mountain and the surrounding waters erupt in a chaotic, boiling frenzy of spiritual energy. He laughed wildly, telling the junior that if he hadn't been woken up, he might have actually wasted more time on that stupid beast. Now, he saw that Chang'e was the true, supreme Tao fruit bestowed upon him by the heavens themselves. A lucky break, one might say. The Taoist longevity felt the surging power within his body and let out a triumphant, arrogant laugh, having plotted for countless eras for this day. By devouring this perfect, flawless longevity immortal body, he believed he could finally sever his ties to this world and its limitations. He believed he could mend the flaws in his own great Tao and ascend to godhood, regardless of whatever supreme being might stand behind this boy. In this world, he felt free to soar as high as a bird or dive as deep as the sea. But Gu Xiaodao knew the old man was celebrating far too early. Gu Xiaodao let out a thunderous roar, unable to restrain himself any longer as his blood energy soared to the heavens, glowing with golden supreme laws. The energy flowed over his skin like molten lava as he threw a punch so powerful the void itself collapsed. It was a dazzling display of raw strength. The Taoist longevity watched that overbearing, peerless punch with a look of utter disdain. He simply raised a hand with a soft hum. The entirety of Mount Undying shook as endless lifespan energy gathered before him, condensing into a single, formidable barrier. It formed a massive, milky white shield. With a heavy thud, Gu Xiaodao's fist slammed squarely into the surface of the barrier. A deafening explosion echoed across the entire Xintian continent, sending a terrifying storm of energy swirling out from the center of Fox Star Island. The shockwaves swept out in every direction. However, Gu Xiaodao was shocked to find that his punch, which could shatter stars, had done little damage. The shield merely trembled slightly, without a single crack appearing on its surface. He stared in disbelief, wondering how this was even possible. The Taoist longevity gave a cold, mocking laugh, declaring that within his longevity realm, he was absolutely invincible. He explained that every attack would be neutralized by the lifespan energy accumulated over countless eras, slowly draining Gu Xiaodao's own vitality. Ultimately, he would become nothing more than nourishment. As those words fell, the boiling lake of longevity reacted violently. Thousands of milky white chains erupted from the water like venomous snakes, coiling toward Gu Xiaodao from every possible direction. Gu Xiaodao roared for them to get back, unleashing his supreme power to shatter the chains into dust. But the chains were relentless. They seemed infinite. The moment they were broken, they reformed and lunged again. It was, to be honest, a rather frustrating predicament. Even someone as powerful as Gu Xiaodao found himself pinned down by these annoying shackles. "Third uncle, I told you not to get so worked up." We see Chang'e watching this scene without the slightest hint of tension, merely shaking his head. He knew the old man was a local tyrant here. He was a tyrant physically tethered to this entire domain. To Chang'e, his uncle was acting like a hothead, punching a wall that felt no pain. The wall might vibrate, but it wasn't actually hurting the house at all. And then, the old man turned his gaze back. "Junior, now it is your turn." Having dealt with the nuisance of Gu Xiaodao, the Taoist longevity locked his gaze on Chang'e. To him, the boy was a walking treasure chest. He saw Chang'e as the main course of this grand feast. Once he was captured, everything would be over. With a flicker of his body, he crossed through space in an instant, appearing right before Chang'e. His massive hand, entwined with the laws of longevity, reached for the boy's head. He lunged forward to seize the body he so desired. A look of pure, unrestrained greed washed over the Taoist longevity's face. He felt as though success was already within his grasp. He could almost see himself taking over this perfect vessel and looking down upon eternity. However, the scene he expected, of a boy begging for mercy and terror, simply didn't happen. It was quite a disappointment for him, really. The impossibly handsome youth just stood there quietly, even letting out a bored yawn. His gaze was calm, perhaps even a bit dismissive. It was as if he were watching a clown perform a tired act. Chang'e curled his lip and noted that the performance was, frankly, rather clumsy. The Taoist longevity felt a surge of fury, increasing the power in his hand. But just as his fingers were about to touch the boy's hair, he suddenly froze. His entire being, along with his prideful longevity realm, came to a complete and sudden standstill without any warning. Space itself seemed to solidify in that moment. A pressure that defied language and surpassed all understanding of worldly laws began to descend. This supreme majesty arrived in total silence. It wasn't a show of brute force or spiritual energy, but something much deeper than that. It felt like the heavens themselves, or the primordial rules that have existed since the birth of the universe. A bit overwhelming, one might say. Before this immense pressure, the power the Taoist longevity had cultivated over eras felt as insignificant as a single speck of dust. His hand remained stuck in midair, unable to move an inch. The greed and joy on his face were replaced by a mask of frozen shock. In their place came a sense of total confusion and a primal fear rising from the very depths of his soul. He had no idea what was happening. He wondered why he couldn't move. His mental state, which had remained unshakable through countless centuries, began to fracture and crumble. In this moment of total collapse, he tried desperately to circulate his internal power, hoping to break free from this invisible shackle. But he discovered, to his horror, that his connection to Mount Undying and the entire world had been severed by an unseen hand. He wanted to scream and demand to know who was doing this, but he found he couldn't even make a sound. The silence was absolute. At that very moment, a voice rang out, calm, gentle, yet carrying an absolute authority that seemed to command the very laws of the universe. The sound echoed softly across the world, asking who had given him the audacity to touch his son. It wasn't a loud voice, really. Yet, it reached the ears of every living being on the Xiantian continent. Then, under the terrified gaze of the Taoist longevity, the void in front of Chang'e began to ripple like water. A figure dressed in a white robe, with black hair cascading over his shoulders, and a strikingly handsome, dignified face, slowly stepped out from the distortion. The world itself seemed to bow in submission. This newcomer was none other than the current head of the Gu family, Gu Lingtian. Chang'e looked at him without the slightest hint of surprise, simply noting that his father had finally arrived. He knew he could count on him. Lingtian remarked that since Chang'e had chosen the foolish Gu Shuidao for his first trip, he naturally had to keep a watchful eye. Ignoring the paralyzed Taoist longevity entirely, Lingtian looked at his son with warmth and reached out to straighten the boy's slightly messy collar. Nearby, the chains of longevity binding Gu Shuidao vanished into thin air the very instant Lingtian appeared, freeing her completely. She scratched her head sheepishly and approached, claiming she had only been playing around and hadn't even started getting serious yet. In front of her majestic elder brother, this supreme powerhouse, who was usually so overbearing to others, suddenly looked quite small. She acted like a younger sibling who had been caught making a mistake. To be honest, she feared her brother more than anyone else. It was a fear born from a lifetime of lessons. Lingtian glanced at her, noting that nearly putting Chang'e in danger wasn't just playing around. He told her to report to the law enforcement hall for punishment upon their return. Shuidao's face fell, but she didn't dare to argue. Deep down, she felt a bit wronged. She hadn't expected such a hidden threat in this place, and besides, it was Chang'e's idea to enter. She had tried to advise him, but it seemed her brother was simply looking for any excuse to punish her today. Families, right? The three of them chatted casually as if no one else were there, while the Taoist longevity remained completely ignored by the group. By now, the Taoist had recovered from his initial shock, his eyes fixed on Gu Lingtian with a growing sense of dread. In those murky eyes, nothing remained but endless despair. He realized he was facing a true, living emperor of the heavens. He realized he was facing a being far beyond a mere supreme, a true emperor of heaven and earth with a foundation so vast it defied logic. Before Gu Lingtian, he wasn't even an ant. It was over. Everything he had meticulously planned for countless eons was crumbling to dust. Just as success was within his reach, he had somehow provoked a terrifying existence that surpassed his wildest, most fearful imaginings. He wondered who this man truly was, his heart drowning in regret. Lingtian simply noted the audacity of wanting to steal his son's body. Finally, having finished dealing with his family matters, Lingtian turned his gaze toward the Taoist longevity. His eyes remained perfectly calm. Yet beneath that calm lay a coldness capable of freezing the entire universe. To be honest, a single look was more than enough. The Taoist felt his very soul begin to freeze and shatter under that stare. He desperately wanted to beg for mercy or explain himself, but he couldn't utter a single word. Lingtian, seemingly losing interest, indifferently asked if he truly desired to seek eternal life. Lingtian decided to grant him that wish. In a way, he slowly raised a finger and pointed it lightly toward the trembling Taoist. That single finger seemed ordinary enough, yet it carried the supreme power to rewrite the laws of the world with a single thought. As he pointed, the heavenly way of the entire Xiantian continent roared in fear, as if bowing before its true master. The Taoist longevity let out a scream of absolute despair. He could feel his connection to the undying mountain being severed. His bond with the lake of longevity and the very laws of this world were being stripped away by an irresistible divine force. Inch by inch, his power was peeled away. The longevity sword he was so proud of crumbled like a sandcastle before a rising tide. It was wiped away with ease. The life force he had hoarded over countless ages began to pour out of him like a bursting dam. The energy surged wildly from his body, returning to the milky white lake from which it had been stolen so long ago. His appearance, which had just returned to a prime middle-aged state, began to wither and age right before our very eyes. His cultivation level plummeted from the peak of the Supreme Realm, crashing down through the late and middle stages without stopping. It fell past the early Supreme stage, through the Saint and God King realms, until finally, his power vanished entirely. He was left in a state more pathetic than that of a common mortal, and that, as they say, was that. In the eyes of the Taoist longevity, nothing remained but endless silence and despair, seeing the plans and bitter cultivation of countless eons vanish. Under the weight of that single finger, everything turned to nothing. She could no longer support herself and collapsed, kneeling before Gu Lingtian. She began to kowtow frantically toward the father and son, begging for her life and admitting she was too blind to recognize their true status. She wailed that she deserved 10,000 deaths for offending them, yet pleaded for mercy to keep her miserable life, even if it were like a dog's. At this point, any sense of dignity or pride had been completely abandoned. She simply wanted to survive, no matter how pathetic the cost. Ling Tian watched this display of extreme humility without a hint of emotion in his heart. To be honest, she should have seen this coming. He walked slowly toward the Taoist, looking down at her from a height and noting that while her plan was a bit foolish, it wasn't entirely useless. He rubbed his chin, examining the undying mountain with genuine interest, finding the system she had constructed to be quite intriguing. Using herself as the formation's core to steal the world's longevity and feed it back into herself was, in a way, an impressive feat. Although the path she chose was crooked, the core application of the laws within this circulatory system actually had some merit. Ling Tian remarked that this world only needed one manager, and as the Taoist tried to speak, he raised his finger once again. It was that same finger, yet unexpectedly, Ling Tian reached out and tapped his son's forehead, speaking to him with calm authority. He explained that although her physical shell was now ruined, she was still a natural longevity body with an innate affinity for life laws. Pointing toward the undying mountain, he suggested refining her into a puppet without a will of her own to serve a new purpose. By merging her completely with the mountain, she would become its spirit or a mountain god, allowing the system to continue functioning. This way, the cycle could keep running, steadily producing longevity essence for their family's use without any further trouble. He noted that while the son was the manager, he still needed a gardener, recalling the boy's own words about recycling waste. The boy nodded and gave his father a thumbs up, truly impressed by his father's vision for sustainable development. Nearby, Gu Changdao was left in a daze, wondering how a peak supreme expert could be turned into a mere gardener so casually. Seeing that his son agreed, Ling Tian smiled and raised his hand once more to begin the transformation. And who could blame him, really? This time, we see a flurry of mysterious immortal runes emerge from within his palm, each one glowing with an ancient, profound power. These runes transformed into golden chains, instantly sinking into the Taoist longevity's forehead as she let out a scream far more agonizing than before. She could feel her body, her soul, her memories, and every single thought she possessed being systematically targeted by those golden symbols. Everything was being erased, decomposed, and reorganized bit by bit. She desperately wanted to resist, but she found herself utterly powerless. Endless regret and terror flashed through her eyes as she finally understood the true meaning behind Gu Lingtian's promise to grant her eternal life. This was to be her immortality, a state without self or thought, existing only as a hollow puppet for the rest of time. She would be forever imprisoned in the very cage she had built with her own hands, working for others, a fate 10,000 times more cruel than death. In the final instant before her consciousness completely dissipated, she looked up and saw the handsome young man watching her. To her, his smile was more terrifying than the most wicked demon in existence. And then, quite suddenly, the screaming stopped. The Taoist longevity's withered body stood up once more, though her eyes were now devoid of any spark, leaving only a hollow numbness. She bowed respectfully toward the young master, her movements as precise and mechanical as a marionette on a string. She greeted her new master with perfect etiquette. The boy nodded in satisfaction, and with a wave of Gu Lingtian's hand, the process continued. That puppet body transformed into a streak of light, merging deep into the ley lines of the undying mountain to fulfill its new role. From this moment on, she would be the mountain's spirit and the world's gardener, serving the family for all eternity. Having dealt with this major nuisance, Gu Lingtian's mood improved considerably as he turned his gaze across the vast Xiantian continent. A flicker of heat passed through his eyes, which seemed to contain the very birth and death of the universe. The appetizer, it seemed, was finished. He remarked that it was time for the main course, taking the entire world and packing it away. To be honest, his ambition was rather breathtaking. As Gu Lingtian's voice fell, the supreme pressure of the heavens within him was unleashed without restraint, sweeping across the entire continent. High above, the clouds shifted and the sun and moon lost their luster. The very laws of the world's great Tao trembled under this weight. The world let out an overwhelmed moan, as if it might shatter into pieces at any moment, which, naturally, was exactly what he intended. He noted that this had done them a great favor and saved much effort. Then, looking into the void, he spoke softly, his voice barely a whisper. Yet through a mysterious connection, his command reached the Gu family's ancestral lands billions of miles away. The army was to move out and prepare for the harvest.